We're at the end of 2022 already. How fast time goes past, right? But December, we're going to focus on kind of keeping things fun and keeping things light and just kind of celebrating whiskey in general. There might be an opportunity to take a wee departure from that tonight to talk about more serious elements in whiskey. But I think that's still going to be fun. At the very least, it's going to be interesting. But instead of me doing that myself, like you always listen to in vPubs, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've got somebody that I've been watching just as a light went out. I hope that's not a bad omen. Somebody that I've been watching and reading for a long, long time. We're going to take advantage of the fact that Angus MacRaild is joining us tonight and just consider where we are in whiskey at the end of 2022. Looking forward to it, and I'll see you in a second. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the vPub. Welcome to Thursday night. Yeah, it looks like my light did just go on the blink behind me. That tends to be what happens. And I've also worked out that the audio probably wasn't that great either. Is that a lot better? Um, as usual, you'd think I would be better at this by now. Hopefully, you can hear me a wee bit better now as well. Um, Definitely a bit echoey, saying Andrew Butler. The voice sounds a bit distant and boomy. Hopefully, I've fixed it for you. I have a checklist. I have a habit of things that I do, but I think I was just too busy enjoying this fantastic wee community sample before we went live tonight, and then I got speaking to Angus and forgot to run through the checklist. But hopefully, you can hear me now. The light I cannot fix, or perhaps I can, but it's not going to get fixed right now. So that's it's going to have to just wait for another time. It's not needed. The sample that I have is a Daft Mill single cask for Whiskey Base members. And fortunately, I know who gave me this sample because somebody wrote their name on the label. Please, if you're sharing samples, it's crucial because we need to know who the sample is from. And this is an Ebb sample from my friend Rolf over in Norway. He gave it to me when he was over in Glasgow for the gathering earlier in November. Anyway, it's wonderful to welcome you all. I hope you're all doing very well. I hope you've got something nice in the glass, and I hope you're ready to settle in for some hopefully quite interesting and insightful whiskey chat. Nothing too in itself lofty or, it's just talking about where things are. The whiskey has seen a huge change in the last 2 decades. I would say even more so in the last decade, and even more so again in the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's been quite fascinating to witness the transition that we're in whiskey right now, and whiskey enjoyment, and the kind of buzz that's around whiskey. And for the most part, let there be no mistake, whatever we get talking about tonight, for the most part, it's a pretty positive thing. And I want to focus on the positive things, of course. But it's nice to consider where we are and consider where we are in the context of being enthusiasts, geeks, whiskey botherers, whiskey exciters, however you want to refer to yourself. We just need to kind of remember that we represent today a very tiny sliver of the whiskey drinking community. However, I do think that the impact that we have, and I think that certainly the knowledge that we have and the understanding that we have of a whiskey represents a much thicker chunk. So yes, it could be me. I've got some topics that I'll just run through, some bold statements, some things like that. I'll just draw up as I speak to Angus tonight, and that'll hopefully guide our discussion. It could be me just running through this on my own and just banging my gums like I always do every other week. But when Angus and I spoke about him joining me on a vPub and what topic it could be, I wanted to just abuse the fact that I had him for an hour or so and talk about everything I possibly could. He seemed okay with that. In the meantime, though, I'm going to jump in to the lounge and welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Thank you all so much for pointing out once more that I'd forgotten to connect the correct mic. Angus was too polite to say. He probably noticed it was a bit echoey. Martin Fielder is here. Good to see you, buddy. It's great to welcome you in. The Whiskey Franco's here saying greetings, Roy. Hope all is well. And hello to all the barflies. Everything's great here, Franco. I hope you're well too. Jerry Miller is saying a very good evening to you, Roy. Good evening, Jerry. And Island Hopper Stewart is saying, we're hearing you, but you sound like you're on a remote mic. I was on the built-in mic where I should be on this one now. Close your ears. There we go. Stevie is confirming. Good to see you, Steve, my friend in the States, saying that their audio is fixed now. Fantastic. Good to welcome you in, buddy. Falsgraph is saying now it's better. And Max is saying better now. Good evening, my friend. I did remember to put my watch into theatre mode, Max. You'll be very happy about that. Kilted Moose is in. Good to see you, Scotty. And he's reported just before we went live tonight that he's feeling a wee bit better too. It's good to have you here, buddy, but it's good to have you back to full health again. Fantastic. Good to welcome you in, Scotty. Sugar Kitty is saying, yes, fixed it. And Molasses Mike is saying, good evening. Our Baggy is here. I mentioned you, Andy, not 2 minutes ago. Angus pointed out that the glass that you gifted me to replace my smashed one is one of the original ones. This is a version 1.0, he declared it, with the very, very fine stem. Still love it, Andy, and I'm very precious about it. Good to have you in the vPub. Karsten is here saying, good evening, Roy. Sounds great now. Thank you very much. Good to have you in. And Nick Gascoigne is here too. Alan Smith is saying, that's better. Good to have you, Alan, and thanks for the confirmation. Lucas is saying better. And Tim, Donnerpass Whiskey, is saying, sounds fine here. Superb. Terrific stuff. Island Hopper Stewart says, sounds like you've come out of the cupboard. Gabriel Welding is here. I lose track of the things. Talking to the sponge too, I suspect. It's funny, we were chatting at the weekend too, and I said that, and I don't know, it's kind of strange because it's if you were into whiskey, if you were kind of sipping whiskey in Glasgow or around Central Belt of Scotland, or and just getting into it and kind of into Whiskey Tube and into online writing and all of that stuff, the chances of bumping into Angus or some of his work was impossible to avoid. So I remember sitting in the pot still years ago with Julie, and I turned to Julie and I said, I think we were talking about the folk that we would like to dram with, and the idea would be some kind of celebrity or something like that. And I think I shared who I would like to dram with. But I did mention to Julie, actually, if it was going to be a whiskey chat, I think I'd like to speak to Angus MacRaild. I would like to hang out with Angus for a while and talk to him. And she found that really funny because Angus was just one of Julie's pals, just one of them, one of the crowd. She said, he's just one of us. He's just one of our pals. And I was like, well, aye. And I think it was because of the way he was writing about whiskey. And I think it was because about the depth and the understanding and the context. And because so much of it is focused through the kind of antique whiskey lens sometimes, or how whiskey has transformed over the decades. When he was speaking about even contemporary whiskies, it was in the context or with a bit of reflection towards that. And I always found the input and the insight really interesting. And I also loved the pragmatism and where he was coming from. I liked the fact that he was very matter of fact about a lot of things. And I think the fact that he's never been tied to a producer or anything like that. His voice was always one that was always his own. And he was never really worried about any sensibilities or staying on script, I feel. So I always felt like he would be a fascinating guy to hang out with and talk to. The fact that I can do this live with you tonight is a real treat for me. I hope you guys enjoy it too. Gabriel, I'm glad that you're looking forward to it. And Gino, my friend in Canada, is saying hello, finally home after 3 long days of travel from Scotland. You picked one of the worst possible times to travel back, didn't you, Gino? It was just very bad luck with all the delays all over the place. You've spent hours and days in airports. I'm glad that you're home, buddy. Kilted Drama, good to see you, Gary. He's saying evening, Roy. And Glenn Duncan is saying, my highlight was meeting up with Graham Fraser and the Dark Lord of Whiskey, Aquavite, in July. I don't want to be known as the Dark Lord of Whiskey. And visited iconic bars and distilleries in Glasgow and Speyside. I think we're going to try and focus on the kind of whiskey highlights of the year. Maybe next week, maybe the week after. We've still got 2 more vPubs, 5 vPubs, because there are 5 Thursdays, of course, coming to you in December. Next week is going to be a kind of community feel thing. I'm just going to be putting blind sample kits in the hands of people that I can connect with over the coming days as I meet up with people and things like that. And hopefully they'll be able to input remotely. I'll try and come up with some kind of sheet that they can edit as we go live, and I can just drop into the sheet. And then I can relax with folk dropping in throughout the stream next week just to have a wee bit of a Christmas-themed vPub on the 22nd, a week from tonight. And then on the 29th, will of course be the last vPub of the year is always a kind of celebration of the previous year. So on the 29th of December, it'll be a celebration of 2022. And of course, I'll have to come up with and commit to what my whiskey of the year is and my producer of the year and all that kind of fun stuff that's much, much harder than I ever expected it could be. But regardless, if I don't do it, there will be mutiny. So I will. I'll commit to something. Jimmy Leg is saying, cheers to your new handle, Dark Lord. Thanks for being in, Jimmy, and thank you very much for the drama, friend. I hope you're doing well. Cheers, Jimmy. There's actually a comment from you on Patreon that I think that we should maybe consider kicking off with tonight. Because it sums up a wee bit about exactly what I've just been speaking about Angus. But in Patreon, I did a wee write-up like I always do in Patreon. So when I'm scheduling the video, I'll go in and I'll kind of write some words. Sometimes I manage to even be a little bit succinct about it, but not this week and not often. But this week, I got a few comments back, and there was a general kind of buzz and excitement about the fact that Angus was going to be joining me tonight. And Jimmy Legg, well, we know him as Blair. But Jimmy Legg wrote in and said, I like Angus. I'll just read this out. I like Angus so much that I've kept something he wrote as a Google Doc. Highland Park remains one of the few distilleries that is still truly cerebral and evocative for me as a drinker. That is always where the ultimate pleasure will be found. And if we are to preserve this notion of truly great whiskey going forward, it cannot be done purely by good casks alone. I still believe distillate is the stronger propellant of beauty in whiskey. I write that a lot, but I don't write it anything as nicely or succinctly as that. So there you go. We have a fan of Angus and Jimmy Legg as well. Let me just get into it. Let me just kind of reach out to Angus and bring him in tonight. I'm looking forward to making the most of his time. For those of you who don't know who Angus is more than just, as Julie said, one of us or a pal or something. Angus is somebody that has become, you might know him as the Sponge, the Whisky Sponge. A lot of folk do. He's built up a bit of a reputation as being as an expert on antique whiskies through his time in auctions and things like that. Historical concepts in whiskey. He's also currently alongside Serge Valentine at WhiskyFun and doing reviews over there. He now owns Decadent, I believe he owns Decadent Drinks. We'll find out in a minute if he's the owner or not. And he's now an independent bottler, and you'll know his bottlings as Whisky Sponge bottlings. He's just, in whiskey, a very well-kent face. So I'm going to reach out to Angus now, and if he's comfortable, I'll just bring him straight in and say, Angus, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me, Roy. I'm slightly racking my brains as to where it was I wrote that thing about Highland Park.
Do you remember it?
All right, actually, I was quite happy with it. Hearing it back. Normally, when I hear my own stuff back, I think, would have rewritten that if I had had another crack at it. But no, that's all right. I still agree with it. So, yeah.
Well, no doubt Jimmy Legg will know where he's lifted it from, but he's saved it because it obviously struck a chord with him, right?
Yeah, I do love Highland Park. It still holds up in my head, that sentiment. And yep. I am an owner of Decadent Drinks, but I'm one of a few owners of Decadent Drinks, not the sole chief.
Perfect.
And I would say that I'm maybe an 8th of WhiskyFun, maybe a 16th of WhiskyFun. And Serge has been doing it for about, I don't know, 100 years, and I've just sort of tagged on at the end on his coattails, so I can't.
Yeah, he recently celebrated, and I think it was earlier this year, 20 years of WhiskyFun, right?
Aye, that's right. Yeah, it's this year is the 20th year.
So there we go. That's the apprenticeship. If anybody's thinking about starting off reviewing whiskey, the apprenticeship seems to be one of 20 years. But I imagine, Angus, through speaking to you as we led up to this, you're also, maybe through the antique expertise and things, the auction experience that you have, you're also a kind of go-to guy if the BBC is needing somebody to comment on X auction or some.
I don't think I am. I don't think I am. I think that there's been a couple of instances where that happened, and it was just so there was one time where Whiskey Auctioneer had a big collection in America, this Gooding collection thing, and as part of that, they got me out there to talk about some of the old bottles in the collection and just give a bit of chat. They wanted to do some video content, and you know, I didn't want to turn down a trip to America, so go and look at a big fancy collection that nobody had ever heard of. It was a good opportunity. So as part of that, I did that, and then sort of as an addendum to that, there was a couple of media rounds, and obviously promotional and PR and stuff like that. And I got called up by Sky News to do a live thing in the morning, which I think it was it during the pandemic or so? I don't know. It was sort of just when the pandemic had started. I don't know, but there was this live link, and I thought, thank goodness it's at 7:30 in the morning, because no one will have seen that. And then, of course, it's a slow news day, and they put that on as like a clipped thing of me talking about, and it's talking about Macallan 1926, which is this. It's become this monstrosity of a bottling that, you know, is always been leveraged for world records, and every auction house wants to get one in, and I just think it's silly, to be honest with you. And they're just such silly whiskies. And of course I go on and I try to thread the needle, you know, and try and find the balanced way where I can sort of say something interesting about it without
declaring it.
Selling my soul down the river. But
avoid the hyperbole, but stay positive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was fine. And I totally screwed it up. The interviewer wanted to talk about Sotheby's, and I forgot I was supposed to be here at the behest of Whiskey Auctioneer. I didn't even mention them. So I think I did a dreadful job on that front. And then when they snipped this video up and put it on their Facebook thing, there was all these comments saying, this is atrocious, £1 million bottle during a pandemic, it's immoral. And I was thinking, well, I don't necessarily disagree with that. And then the worst one was someone said they couldn't even get a Scotsman. I just thought, Angus MacRaild,
that's the ultimate.
So yeah, no, I think I'm not the go-to person. I have occasionally done the media round, but very rarely. And I look for opportunities to say no to that sort of stuff, because I just think I'm not very good at it. I don't feel, it's not my environment. You know, my natural habitat is stuff like this, is nerding out in pubs and discussing the difference in like glass codes from 80s bottles of Bunnahabhain or whatever. So
whiskey caves are preferred over studios, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the other time I went on some BBC Scotland thing, and then I got a curveball question about gin, and I made such a face about it, because I sort of did a face, and my girlfriend made it into a GIF. By the time I got home, Lucy snapped it off the TV and turned it into a GIF. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I can imagine. I dread the day that somebody goes through all the faces that I've pulled on here, often by mistake. Anytime I'm going through and you pause it, you never pause on a nice balanced image of yourself. It's always going to be.
Sounds like you've got great merch opportunities there. That sounds like an advent calendar.
Perfect. Yeah, the 24
advent calendar. There you go. 24 faces.
24 ugly faces of Roy. Aye. Well, it'd be easy to fill it up. I could do a 365 days a year calendar for that. But we did speak about, before we went live tonight, we talked a wee bit about the fact that we have things in common. We're into whiskey. We live in Scotland. All these things. But I think it's hard to consider how many people are out there that have found a job in whiskey that they just incidentally or by happenstance discovered themselves in. I think we share that, but I also think we share something that it's a job that even 10 years ago we couldn't have envisaged existed for us. Would that be Would that be accurate? If we talk about, I want to kind of just chronologically summarize before we go into some of the topics tonight, how Angus got from student to sitting in your whiskey cave with a very
Yeah.
impressive collection.
So I think what you say is true, and I think I am probably of maybe the first generation of person that could carve out an independent, like a properly independent role for themselves, or a job or a career, whatever you want to call it. And
Yeah.
because of that, what I've done is not had a lot of planning behind it. I haven't had a big grand master plan, and I've sort of stumbled through a little bit. Like I never planned to be an independent bottler. It's been quite an organic thing, and I think one of the key things that underpins everything, which I often say is sort of a joke, but it's true as well, is that I'm not qualified to do anything else. You know, if this whiskey thing all fell to pieces tomorrow, I have no idea what I would do. I would like to maybe be a writer or something, but I'm not. You know,
If it was
chances of me
writing about
doing
whiskey,
that
right?
is extremely difficult. Yeah. So the way it started for me was, uh, one of the big things was that we moved from Scotland to England when I was very young, but I was old enough, about just turned 4, I think, and that I remembered Scotland, and I had a lot of happy memories of Scotland. And we lived in Peebles, but we also visited the west coast of Scotland where my dad's family were from. And I think that cocktail of circumstances made me miss Scotland quite a lot, and therefore get into Scottish things quite a lot. So I got very quickly but I had an interest and an appetite for Scottish music and Scottish food, Scottish TV, humor, all these sorts of things had quite a big impact on me. And I was always a fan of my dad. My dad was, sort of my hero growing up, and he liked whiskey, but not in a way that we like whiskey. He was
Sure.
and the more I look back on it now, sort of unpicking it from a distance, he was really like a sort of, I suppose he was originally like a working class lad from the west coast of Scotland who just so happened to develop a taste through, I think, probably through working in a bar and then going to uni in Edinburgh and meeting pals, sharing drams, and then just he liked Laphroaig and he liked peaty whiskies and he liked the flavour of peat specifically. And
Yep.
every year my mum would buy him for a birthday and Christmas, like a bottle, specifically Kalila or Laphroaig were the ones that he liked, and really his favourite was Laphroaig 10.
Yeah.
So one of the earliest memories I have of whiskey is, and it wasn't always that. He would often have just blended whiskey. Like we'd have a bottle of Bell's in the house because they did not have a lot of money. Like I think we forget how different it was, back then.
Yep.
Like he was just him working, my mum at home, dad was a teacher. They would just have a bottle of, even like a half bottle of Bell's sometimes, and it would nurse it over, like it would last months, and but occasionally, a special occasion, bottle of Laphroaig 10. So that was a big thing to me. And I remember reading the back of the bottle, and I remember when being quite young, probably 4 or 5, something like that. I said, "Can I have a little taste, Dad?" And he gave me a tiny sip from his tumbler, and I think he thought it'd be funny, but actually, it just sort of created a monster because I just thought, "That's really, what is that? That's amazing." And it's probably the reason why to this day Laphroaig is still, if push comes to shove, it's not always my favorite whiskey, but it's maybe my favorite distillery, and maybe it's like my favorite broad brushstroke flavor in whiskey is Laphroaig. And that's emotional as much as organoleptic. But from there, it nurtured a little interest in whiskey. And when we would go and visit Scotland, my uncle worked. So my dad's brother lived by Loch Fyne, and he worked in the fish farm there at the time. And in those days, that meant like just dozens of bottles of good malt whiskey as presents. You do favors for people, the guys at the smoke, the guys that were, the lorry drivers, whatever. And of course, it was like a sort of, this network trade of, bottle of malt whiskey. There you go.
Yep.
And he had this cupboards full of even I remember like mid-90s, I remember there being rare malts in that cupboard, and like rare malt bottlings, the Diageo series. And every time we go up to visit, all the adults are up, hee-haw and drumming and crack and, listening to music and proper sort of like good West Coast Scottish culture. And I would be sort of sneaking about, reading the backs of the bottles, all fascinated by, absorbing all this 90s Scotch whiskey marketing bump. Even then, I think I twigged early on, like, there can't be that many like miraculous soft water burns in Scotland that are making all this incredible whiskey, or it can't be down to that. So that was really the foundation, and that led to reading books, and then that led to when I was at uni, thinking, I'm not going to work as a waiter during the summer. Why don't I? Well, if I am, why don't I do it somewhere interesting like Islay? And I'd already been going to things like Whiskey Live in Glasgow, the very first ones. And I met Stuart Thompson there from Ardbeg, and he suggested, oh, go out to Ardbeg, go to the distillery. And I went out there for a visit, met Jackie. She was super busy that day, and I turned up saying, can I camp here? I said, yeah, but you have to do work. So that just led to doing 2 full summers working at Ardbeg as a tour guide. And that's what I mean. It's just sort of...
Year would that have been then?
That would have been 2005, 2006. And then I did maybe about a month in 2007 as well. And from that, that's a melting pot place that drew in people that I would never otherwise meet. Like, I knew about old bottles before, but I had no idea how you accessed them. And they were expensive even then. But I remember looking on sort of the early whiskey internet, late 90s, looking at things about Samaroli and these fusty old Italian bottlings, or like old Lagavulin 12-year-old from the 70s and 80s, thinking, and reading what people said about them, thinking, how the fuck do you try these things?
Yeah.
But then when I went to Islay, and then I realized, oh yeah, there's all these like pretty well-off European nerds that are just swarming here and bringing their cars with boots full of sample bottles. And I met there's a Belgian guy called Luke Timmermans who had came to Ardbeg with his club, and they used to pester me when I was working there for tastes of all these single casks. And after that, he said, oh, you've been very good to us. Come out to the car, and if you'd like to try something interesting. And lo and behold, there was a Lagavulin 12-year-old old white label, white horse bottling in his boot. And I said, I want to taste that. And that blew my mind. That was one of those moments that's like, boom, I need to learn everything about this stuff. This is miraculous. This is different. So they're just moments like that. And that's what I mean. It's just something that sparked something that led on to something else that made a connection. It's very organic.
Yeah. And you've just kind of, what you're saying is that you've just been passively building a career ever since. And if it fails and hits the rocks, it's no fault of yours. You just followed it, right?
It's getting less and less passive. I suppose it's getting a bit more deliberate. And because now, but then, when we started doing Sponge, when I started writing Whisky Sponge, that was just a hobby thing, because I thought I would like to do more writing. I enjoy writing maybe more than I enjoy whiskey, but I don't do it as much. And it's probably why I really resist doing it for money, because I much rather, there's not much money in whiskey writing unless you really, I don't know, unless you sort of absolutely go to town on it. But that's why I think it's just, I'd much rather just do writing as and when I want to do it, and about subjects that I really care about, or that come to me and I think, yeah, that's something I should write about. And Sponge for a while was an obvious thing that it seemed like a bit of a gap. There was so much stupid nonsense in whiskey. And when you love something, you also, I think, that's what makes you most want to criticize it sometimes, because you want to pull down and puncture the sort of charlatans and nonsense that goes on, which in your eyes is diminishing what you love. And to this day, I love whiskey, the drink, and I love a lot of the people associated with it, but I don't particularly love the industry. And that was the sort of feeling that motivated Sponge for a long time. But then I never planned Sponge, the blog, to have anything to do with a career. It was literally just a hobby, in the same way that WhiskyFun absolutely remains. It's a hobby for me. It's a way to exercise my, an outlet. Sit down, nose taste, write some notes, and occasionally write a little bit more in detail, and to have a platform, But I yeah, with with decadent drinks, when we started doing bottling, it was just an incidental thing. Like my friend Ian McClune, who runs Whiskey Auctioneer, and he said to me he'd done some bottling under this label called Copper Monument, and he said, we've done some bottling, we've had some mixed results, we'd like to try again, but we'd do something different. Have you got any ideas? Would you like to collaborate? And it just so happened I'd been thinking at that point, why don't I do a bottling for Sponge? And that's all it was. It was just an idea. I had no notion of how to do it. I didn't have the funds or anything. So it was just a bit of fortuitous circumstance. And of course, it sort of one thing led to another, and then it's become something that started as a hobby that became a side project that became a business. And now we have employees, so you have to think more long term and have to sort of think about where's this going, what we're planning, and it's become very serious. Small, I hope thriving business. We've got a really lovely team. I like what we do. I think we managed to bottle good products. So it's going to be interesting to see where it's only been going 2 years. When I think about it, like sort of half a year of doing Sponge casually, then about 2 years of formally since we started Decadent Drinks, and so yeah, the next 2 years.
You've gone from just a wee opportunity and a casual bottle to having to put on your responsible trousers, and actually you're running a business now at Decadent Drinks.
Yeah, and that's part of the interesting thing is trying to. It's been such a steep learning curve for me. I'm not a business person. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a numbers person. Spreadsheets still give me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
I'm one of those, and I'm very lucky. Decadent Drinks' strength is that we have a very experienced team in the background that nobody sees or really knows about. But my business partners are people with very deep and expansive business experience, and they're not whiskey people, but they've got a skill set which is utterly absent from me. So, and my paranoia for a long time is just that I'm that creative guy. I'm that annoying creative guy that comes in and says, guys, I've got this wonderful idea. And then they're like, yeah, how are you going to pay for that? And it's not how it works. So yeah, it's been very interesting. It's been a steep learning curve, as I said, and still so much more to learn, of course. But I think we've done all right, and I'm still excited. I still, despite I think the challenge with it is that we've positioned ourselves or set ourselves up quite explicitly as saying, oh, we want to be about fun and having fun, and we still want to kind of keep alive that that thing about the Sponge, which was, being a bit surreal, being a bit playful, having fun, taking the piss occasionally, being a bit edgy or subversive sometimes. And
I think it was the first time I ever encountered satire in whiskey. And I think that it was when I first started to read the Sponge, it was quite jarring, because I imagined, and I didn't know it was you, of course. Nobody, I don't know how many people knew it was you when it was first being shared, but it would be shared in these Facebook groups, and people would be like, oh, what do you think of this? And, it was this oddball thing, and you were making up these aliases for people that it was obvious who they were, but you were using it as from a point of satire. But you were drawing
very, are probably probably pretty brutal when I think back now.
You have been very brutal. Yes,
I think this is the thing about the Sponge, is that I would hope that if you read it long term, it would be obvious that a lot of it comes from a place of affection, and actually the majority of it is just complete gibberish. Like, it's silly, surreal, funny, daft humor that is very much my sense of humor and is poking fun at people I like. And it's interspersed with these occasional posts, which tended to be about Macallan, Diageo, and Dalmore, and occasional complete charlatans that were much more acidic and much more barbed. But it became, over time, I got better at identifying what the right angle for specific subjects was. I think there's some though I look back where I was probably punching down, and that was, and I wouldn't agree with that now. I wouldn't do that now. You know, part of the learning process of doing that and writing that was learning about a bit more like sort of in deep detail, philosophical detail, if you like, about what satire is and what that specific area of humor is and what it should do and what its function is, what its purpose is. Like,
I think you've already touched on it. The idea of using negative language to draw attention to a negative aspect is a positive thing. But you're doing it for your love for the product, and you don't want this negative aspect to endure. So you need to draw attention to it. How do you do that? You can either just write about it, or you can write about it in a satirical, humorous, fun way. And I think that what you did with the Sponge got a lot more traction than if Angus was just writing a regular blog. I personally believe.
I hope so.
Jimmy Legg, sorry, has just bought us a dram to say, who's
All right.
better satirized the whiskey establishment than Angus? He absolutely kills it. Will we be seeing more articles? June is a long time ago. So I was expecting that to come in from the chat, buddy. I really was, that people are going to be going, what's happening? But it's because of what we've just talked about, right? It's got to be a time issue.
It's bandwidth, and there's quite a few. I would say there's like 3 reasons. One of which is just pure bandwidth, like just energy. Like doing the company Decadent Drinks now takes up a lot of time. And then all the other bits and pieces I do around that just absorbs more time. And then also becoming a dad this year is, as I'm sure you know, it's just like, it's energy and time, and kind of having the, like, I don't know, almost like emotional energy to want to sit down and really, really write and do. I'm frightened to touch the keyboard on Sponge unless I'm really confident that I'm going to do it justice, and I feel like, yeah, I've got a real article in me here. I want to get it out. So I really resist doing something unless I feel confident I'm going to do a good job, because I don't want the Sponge to be I'd rather there's fewer articles on it, but the standard is maintained that in my own eyes, that I feel I'm being true to myself, and that I feel that I would read it back and think, yeah, I'm happy with that. That was.
Yeah, I think we're much more similar than we might imagine. I think that the danger there is because you are maybe being a wee bit of a protectionist about it, and precious, and you want it to be close to perfect. You want it to be worthy of the Sponge thing. There's now a brand on the back of Sponge as well, of course. So that
and I've kept them. I've tried to keep them reasonably separate. I don't mention I don't use the blog as a springboard for the bottlings very deliberately, because I want to. Although I will take the piss out of myself on there for doing bottlings, and I think we did a post saying Sponge sells out or something like that, which is absolutely fine. And of course, some people pile in and comment saying, "Oh, you're selling out. It's a joke," but whatever.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is that you've got folk there like Jimmy, who saves documents of you and chimes in and who buys us a dram to say that you're killing it. There is an argument for holding off, and the perfectionist side of you wants to hold off, but just to get stuff out there would kind of, I mean, it makes it a bigger monster, doesn't it, if you wait till the juices are flowing? Because the further that you go, I think the juices flow less and less.
I suppose there's a third part.
I'm just bullying you into more content.
No. Well, listen, I want to do more, and if I'm honest, what I think I will do is probably draw a clean line under it at some point. But what I want to do is do some more writing on it before that happens, and really try and go to town. But it's just, so part of it is bandwidth. The other part of it is something which I've found as I've gone along, which is the more I get embedded in the industry via doing bottling and other stuff as well, but I find myself pausing to think, well, who am I going to piss off if I write this? Is that going to endanger the possibility of doing business down the line at this sort of thing? And I never used to think about that. And now, if I'm being completely honest with myself, I do think about that sometimes. And so it's not that I don't think that there are some very obvious things that I could easily go and write an article about. But I suppose I do think more and more, I'm more cautious that, like, should I do this, or what are the implications if I do this, and so that's a part. It's not completely a part of it. If someone does something absolutely outrageous, like the Bamore thing with the stupid shaped bottle that looked like a sex toy, that one was
Yeah.
just like
Too
I
much
just I just
low
sort of
hanging fruit,
felt
right?
I
Yeah.
just sort of felt my hands dive onto the keyboard for that one. But
Well, if only there was a
yeah,
platform out there that could offer somebody like you the cover of a brand new fresh alias. And then, anyway, I'm not even going to go
I'm
there.
not sure I can write with a mask on. That's the problem. I don't know how good I'd be at disguising my. Anyway, I wouldn't want. Well, that's a separate conversation. But
Yeah,
I'm not shy of critiquing anymore. I just also think that uh, I think criticism is best when served with care and thought, and and also that you are someone who, I don't want to be a commentator that is just about criticism. I also like to celebrate as well, because whiskey is
absolutely.
as much about positivity and pleasure and joy and experiential aspects to it as well, and that's the primary thing for me. um it's why I
Criticism has to
suppose,
come from a point of love, absolutely,
yeah.
as we've agreed completely. Chester, you were saying similar to Angus, my earliest memories of whiskey was Lefroy from my dad, and I loved it from the very start. Favourites are the 10, Cask Strength, and 18. I'm still 21. Wow, Chester, wow. And greatly enjoying my whiskey journey. Aye, if only I'd discovered it back when I was 21, I would have been able to pick up a few of the gems that you've already mentioned.
Well, I you know
I was just
I don't
about to
know.
segue into a gem actually, because I think we both have the same. Just out of pure coincidence, you picked up one of these, and I just
Yeah,
happened to have it over my. It's quite remarkable how close these two are together. Maybe only a
yeah.
couple
So
of years.
yours is a few years earlier than mine. You've got just the 26 2/3 fluid ounces measurement and
Yep,
70 proof, whereas I've got the double measurement, metric and imperial, which means mine should be from around about 78 to 80, and
yep,
yours is probably bottled with, and also the paler label usually gives it away. It's usually mid to early 70s, I would say. So you've
yeah.
got, yeah, UK market mid 70s ish bottling.
This was a gift to me. It's appeared on a vPub before this bottle. It was a gift to me from my neighbour Eileen across the road. And I absolutely adore this. It's poured in very, very small measures every now and again.
I've been revisiting a lot of older official bottlings. Like something I was just trying while you were introducing there at the start
Oh
was
yeah, yeah, yeah,
one of these old 1980s Bunnahavens. This is like for a German import company that I'd never heard of before, called Genuport, and 43%, 12-year-old Bunnahaven with quite a bit of sherry to it, bottled around mid 1980s, and they're just outstanding whiskies. Some of them are like the Glenlivet I've got, they're really lovely, and I think there is one of the most pleasurable things is that they're not super detailed whiskies. They're not overly complicated. You don't have to nose and think and battle your way into them. You can just pour a dram in a tumbler, or you can, if you want, really go to town with a nosing glass like the
yeah.
Blenner's glass or whatever. But there's information and there's truth in there as well about the fact that whiskey flavors have changed over the years, and they're just very pleasurable in their like simple, unvarnished, direct, quite authentic flavors and pleasures to just sit and sip and get lost in all
Yeah,
the time. And
I
that
really.
increasingly is what I return to time and time again in whiskey.
I will also recall again when we talk about not necessarily examining the whiskey, but as we sip and enjoy the whiskey, letting the whiskey take us on a thought process of. And you were responsible actually for one of the whiskies that I still rave about and talk about today. We were at the Old and Rare show, and I walked up and I said, "Just give me just recommend something to me." And you asked me, how much do you want to spend? I gave you an idea, and you pulled out a bottle of, I think the brand was Hoy from memory,
Hmm.
and it was a 1905 bottling at 21 years old, a blended malt, so
Yeah,
from 1886,
yeah,
a 19th century whiskey. And you poured it into, it was a blender's glass I had that day. In fact, it was I think you poured it into the one that I kept for a while up until I broke it, and I carried it around with me. I just carried it everywhere. It was gorgeous. I took it into the tasting. I think it was Sukhinder Singh's tasting, and it was all the SMWS's, the 1 dot bottles that he did, the masterclass.
Yeah, that was my tasting actually with Arthur Motley and
That's
Charlie
correct.
McLean, I think. Yeah,
that's exactly right. It was. I didn't realize it was yours, but it was.
I think Sukhinder was in there. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Sukhinder was talking through it, and so was Charlie, so was Arthur. Arthur's quote from that day was "Thank God for Kalila." I'll never forget it. But I took it in, and I was the last person in to the tasting, and I got ushered to my seat, and I was sat next to Ingvar Rond. And Ingvar questioned me, and he said, "Why have you brought a dram into the masterclass?" And I told him what it was. I said, "I don't want to drink this. I want to keep it. I want to savor it for as long as I can." And he went, "1886." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you mind?" Now it's unknown as to, I've spoken to Ingvar about this, whether he was asking for a sip or just a nose, but I encouraged him to take a sip as well. Quite an incredible experience, because you're literally sitting there sipping something that was created in the 19th century. It's almost beggars understanding, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that was a good
I
recommendation. Thank you for that. Not just in the whiskey, but obviously just that impact that had for me. I don't know when that was, maybe 2017, 2018.
It would have been the 2017 Whiskey Show Old and Rare, I think. I think the first one.
Something about
the second, maybe the 2018 one, because I don't know. I think it might have been the second show we did in Glasgow that I had that bottle. I remember it. I've kept 10 cl from it. I don't keep whiskey from many bottles, but when there's really special historic things, I try and put 10 cl like up to the gunnels in a really sort of hermetically sealed,
incredible
sample, and keep it for.
Well, let's get some of the controversial subjects up.
Yeah,
that aren't really controversial. I've got some statements here, Angus. I'm just going to drop them up on screen, and they're meant to prompt a reaction in you or a point of discussion or something. But if I've got you here for that, I don't know if you're on a curfew or anything tonight. I don't know if you have to be up early or away early tonight. But if I've got your time here,
I've got time. Let's rattle.
Okay, good. Let's just start at the top as we segue in from what we've just been talking about. Whiskey is better. Now, this is not my opinions I'm posting up here. These are just statements that are meant to prompt a bit of discussion. I've actually done entire vPubs on the fact that whiskey, old versus new, old versus now, was whiskey better in the old days, all of that. What I'm actually saying here is that let's talk about that. Whiskey is better today in a hell of a lot of respects than it used to be. How much truth would you put in that statement?
So if you define used to be as the 70s, 80s, and 90s, then I'd say arguably yes, and getting better. If you define used to be as pre-1973, then I would say no. I think we live in a age where we're sort of on the cusp or living through a positive upturn in quality in whiskey, and that's globally. That's not just Scotland, but really, whiskey's booming everywhere. There's new distilleries, and a lot of them are run by people that are sort of chucking out the industry standards, cut out and keep distillery kit, blenders identikit sort of model of making whiskey. And they're doing interesting things, and they're imprinting their personality upon their products through the decisions they make, the ingredients they use, the methods they deploy, the equipment they use. And that's, I think, one of the things, probably one of the key things that really excites me as a whiskey lover about the immediate coming decade in whiskey. And things are happening much faster. I tried some Isle of Raasay drams today I was writing my notes for Saturday's WhiskyFun post, and there's a couple of drams in that. And I just thought, these are 3 years old and they're just fucking great. They're not, it's not a feeling of, oh, well, this is lovely, but just imagine how good it'll be in 10 years' time. It's like,
no, that's right.
This is fucking good right now, and that is something that that feeling is something I increasingly encounter. Now, the style is different from you know, like I've got on my shelf here a cask sample of 1958 Bamor from plain oak, only 4 years old, and it's exquisite. Only 4 years old, but it's a different beast. It's clearly from a different era of production, and it's a totally fascinating thing to try. So whiskey has changed, and I think it's gone through periods of up and down in terms of quality. There's lots of good whiskey made in the 80s and 90s, but generally, I think, and I think also we need to draw a distinction between whiskey made and whiskey bottled. What was
Yes.
put into bottle was not necessarily done with the utmost care and attention in the way that it is now. You speak to people like Sukhinder is a good example, who will talk about how a lot of the Scottish people reacted, the Scottish producers, the sort of the mainstream, your sort of blenders and distillery owners and all these guys reacted quite quite violently, sort of like intensely towards what happened and what came out of Japan in the 90s and early 2000s. Japan went through what happened in whiskey just a bit later. So they're going through the same cycle of like, here's all this amazing old stuff for cheap. Everyone goes, oh my God, that's incredible. Everybody buy Japanese whiskey. And it's like, oh, we haven't been making very much and we've run out and now it's NAS and not very good. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting, really. And I think that with Scotch whiskey, there was a period in the 90s into the 2000s where there was good whiskey being made, but not necessarily great whiskey being bottled. And yeah, I think that's really started to improve, and I think people have noticed in production now what they need to do to really create and dial into quality. What do you think? Oh, hello.
Angus, I'm so sorry.
What happened there?
My internet just crapped out. There's the whole thing. There's everything. I have no idea what it was. I ran to the router. I got the flashing light that is reset for some reason, and then it went blue again. And I've come down and
was I just live that whole time, just sort of twiddling my thumb? No, that's all right. It's fine. I didn't. Yeah, I didn't pick my nose or do anything too embarrassing, I think.
Yeah. So
what were we talking about? Yeah. So you disappeared, and I saw the live thing. And I thought, I'll just keep talking.
But... Thank you so much. Thank you. It did happen once before. I had Graham Cool on, and he managed, him and his wife Faye. My Wi-Fi, it's not even Wi-Fi. My internet just didn't recover that night. It did tonight. And he kept the stream going for ages and ages and ages. So I appreciate that. We were talking about the reaction and the Japanese.
So I think that a lot of the producers saw what was coming out of Japan and thought, shit, our stuff is not as good as this. And I don't know that was the only thing, but I think also, and I do also think that independent bottling has helped with this as well, in that pushing the idea of the single cask strength, showing up what really great quality was, and starting to nurture that kind of very single malt specific enthusiast base. And I think that the knock-on effect from all of that cumulatively was that people started to pay more attention in production, but also in cask selection, bottling, management of stocks, and I'm sure there's people in the industry that would say, oh, you're talking rubbish, but I always go back to bottled evidence. This is the thing, like I've had run-ins with industry people before that say, oh, this is not accurate, but I say, well, I've tasted thousands of whiskies from across a century of production, and there is evidence in these bottles. There's evidence in the glass about trends and about what was happening, and eras of production, and then you go and you look at distillery production data and you extrapolate back and look at the bigger picture. You can see these trends and the way things change. I do think that whiskey now, even in the sort of big guys, the Diageos and everything, is more consistent, and I think they've
Yep.
reached a certain level of very consistent quality. But I think it's technical and not necessarily soulful. I use this distinction quite a lot on WhiskyFun, where I talk about whiskies that have soul, which is something which is much harder to score, and it's much
Yes.
harder
Yep.
to
Articulate sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's lots of whiskies which are very technical, and technicality often derives from wood more than distillate, perhaps. Often it's both, but there's often, we know there's a lot more active wood and a lot more clever wood technology deployed in whiskey production now, and the indies as well as the official guys across all countries. And because it's something that's much more controllable, people understand wood and they can control it, and they can use it to kind of squeeze time a little bit, which is, at the end of the day, when we buy into whiskey, the old style whiskies are expensive because, and the old whiskies are expensive because it's so much about time. Like it's liquid from a bygone era that's still consumable. You're drinking history. You're drinking stuff that was made
Yep.
a long time ago by people that are now dead. You're with old whiskies, you're also tasting something that's sat in oak for decades, and there's something quite cerebral and fascinating and powerful about that. Like time is the one thing we cannot buy or possess more of. But with very old spirits and drinks, there's something about
Oh yeah. Yep.
involving yourself with the experience of time and possessing time, and getting quite close to that notion of buying time. It's pretty fascinating.
So
But
where we are in that aspect, I mean, you've mentioned, you talked about a 3-year-old Rassie
Mhm.
and having a moment with it, and I'm right there with you. I think that there's been so many modern whiskies, and I've got to stop myself saying this is good for a 3-year-old. I talk about this often. This is just good whiskey. The age is incidental, and it's, the newer distilleries are coming along and teaching us actually this age statement thing that you've been banging on about as geeks and enthusiasts for a long time. If the whiskey is made in a certain way, it's not really quite as important as you imagine, and they're starting to show us that might be the case. How do you feel today with the amount of kind of new products, variation from all the distilleries? A lot of the new distilleries that are out there. Are you excited about them now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited, but I'm also overwhelmed, and I think this is something that we all feel as whiskey enthusiasts and people that purchase whiskey, is that there's never been so much competition for our spend, whether it's from indie bottlings or official bottlings. It makes it very challenging to do business in that sector, as literally any indie bottler will tell you. And yeah, it's overwhelming, it's cluttered, but it's also frothy and bouncy and fun and messy, and
Yeah.
you never know what you're going to discover, and there's more chance to be surprised now, I think, than there was for quite a while in the
It's
maybe like 2000s into the 2010s. It was a bit more settled and stagnant, but now it's very vivacious and fun, and there's lots of new stuff happening. There's always something new every week, and I don't buy this argument that there's too many new distilleries, because I think what's happening to whiskey is, I mean, how many wineries are there? Are there too many wineries?
that's right. Yeah.
Are there too many breweries? I mean, it's just what's happened to wine and beer is now starting to happen to whiskey. It just takes longer because whiskey takes so damn long. Even if you're talking 3-5 year old products, it's a long time to set up and get to market. And these people are smaller. They're often family owned or privately owned, or um, as I mentioned earlier, I alluded to that they're run by people that are trying to do something more interesting. So there's
Yeah.
space for that, and I think there's the consumer base for that as well. I think that people are getting a bit tired at the moment. They're getting a bit fatigued because there's so much. A lot of that's tied up in pricing, though. But I think that what we're in the middle of is this world where, yes, whiskey is a bit better than it used to be. I don't think the quality is as good as the amazing whiskies that were broadly made in the 60s, 50s, 40s, and earlier. But that level of quality that's a very complex, difficult thing to attain, I think. And I think what we're on the cusp of moving into is a period where we've reached a real uniform level of technical excellence in what's produced, particularly in Scotland. But what we miss are these peaks that you used to get in, say, in the 50s. You might get some real troughs, but you got a lot of real high peaks. And if I just express it using the point system, I know we all have our own scoring systems, but if I want to say, like, there's loads of whiskies now which to me get 90 points, which is to me is like the point on the scale at which you get into serious quality. But to get above that is really hard. And there's loads of whiskies from the 50s, 60s, whatever, that often quite simple whiskies that'll get 92, 93, 94 points. But to get to that level in modern whiskey production, very difficult. And I think what we're going to see is a shift finally into a world where there's not loads, but enough new producers globally that are really starting to grapple with this idea of how do you make something truly beautiful, and how do you get back to and not even back, but how do you go forward but achieve the kind of like real peaks of beauty and quality and idiosyncrasy and soulful, gorgeous whiskey that existed in history. And not just in Scotland. Some old American whiskies are exquisite as well and have
Well,
their own.
where you talk about not being able to keep up and things, what we're actually talking about there is, again, it's a positive thing, because there's so much variation, there's so much choice. And over the course of the last 10 years, the last 5 years, it's been in Scotch and globally, the granularity of what's available is much more, but the scale is so small. It's not like these new distilleries are flooding the market. I mean, the scale is still pretty tiny by comparison.
It is. That's the thing. It's a greater number of names and producers, but it's not necessarily an uptick in volume. Diageo expands one distillery and adds 10, and the equivalent of 10, 20 of these wee guys.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah,
well, it segues into another topic that I was just about to start talking about, but I realize I've got a whole topic for it, and that is that you would think with the amount of competition, and the way that the way whiskey is developing, the way that people are potentially going to be given all these platforms to develop something that's really, as you mentioned, truly beautiful, something that's different. You would think that then there's going to be an impact then on pricing too. And here's the next statement I'm going to put up here, is that we can have a laugh at this, but this is meant to be very serious.
Yeah.
Whiskey price increases will slow in 2023. Now, I could have written this 100 different ways. Clearly, as I sit with you now, Angus, in 2022, we always say that prices are surely they're meeting the ceiling now. They're meeting the ceiling, and yet that ceiling seems to be just further and further and further out of reach in the prices. Not for all whiskies, absolutely not for all whiskies, and not all of the time. But if I was to say to you, given what we've just spoke about with not being able to keep up because of the pure variety and variation in whiskey, is that going to potentially start to have an impact in pricing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it must. I think there's a couple of broad brushstroke things I would say about pricing and in whiskey, and the sort of, I suppose, the market globally generally. But it's that I think for a long time whiskey was underpriced. 1966 Lafroig, bottled at 30 years of age by Signature in 1966 and sold for £85 a bottle, in my view, was too cheap. I'm sorry, I just think that it deserves to be worth more than that. It should be worth more than that. But that was the nature of the market at the time. And
so that would have been bottled in the late 90s.
That was bottled. There were a bunch of casks of that bottled in 1996 and 1997.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you? I would agree with you now, especially with the benefit of hindsight. That seems very, very cheap. But would you have said it in 1996, 1997? I wonder if that would have been, because it was
and exactly, because a lot of this is hindsight, and you're looking back at a time when the market was so different, and it was really a lot
recovering.
smaller than it is today. And whiskey, and don't forget, malt whiskey is still, and malt whiskey enthusiasm at the level we are talking about, where we're looking at indie bottlers and
New distilleries and yep.
new distilleries. It's still quite small compared to a lot of other drink sectors and things like
Yep.
that. But it is much bigger than it used to be, nevertheless. And I think that whiskey for a long time was too cheap for what it was, even though we didn't realize it at the time. But we didn't know any better. We had no other frame of reference. We had the market we had, the situation we had, and we were used to that, and we perhaps didn't realize how good we had it. We all talk about time machines. We all talk about, oh, I wish we bought that. The first bottle of whiskey I stumped up the money for was a Portell, an 18-year-old. Got my mum to buy it as a present for my dad in 1999 from Lochfine Whiskies, and it was 35 quid a bottle. Now, today, yeah, you can. I'll take 3 cases, please. But
yeah,
but at the time, that was just, there was so much stuff. And Lochfine whiskies, I remember, I've got like shots of the prices on the shelf in my brain, that, but there's no point going into all that. It's such a trope. We all talk about that.
Well, Gordon Fraser mentions it exactly. We're not in the realm of there's no exceptional cask debate again. We contemporary whiskey exciters are outside of that circle of trust. So he's come into whiskey very recently. And the internet is full, social media is full, people like us perhaps are constantly dishing out anecdotes like we are right now about when we first got into whiskey, we could have had this, that, and the next thing. And I think that must be quite difficult for folk coming into whiskey now to hear.
Perhaps. Yeah, it's probably annoying, and that's why I think it's not something that's worth laboring, because it is increasingly alien to people. Even if you came into whiskey in the last 10 years, it's not, stuff was already expensive then. So I suppose my point is just that it was too cheap for a while and it deserved to be more expensive, but I think it's become overcorrected. It's gone too far, and it's twanging too far the other way. Now, the question everyone wants to know is it going to twang back, or is there going to be a correction? I spoke to my my colleagues recently about this, and they said, look, not that we're whiskey people, but from a business perspective and from a sort of a pure market analysis perspective, it's just got all the hallmarks, and they're taking into account things like the price of whiskey and bonds or casks. And they said it's all the hallmark of a market about to collapse. Not completely, but a correction, a quite significant correction. But people have been saying this for a long time, and I'm very reticent about predicting. I do think that the absolute charlatanry and disgusting behavior of the investment club, whatever you want to call them, all these little pop-up absolute snake oil salesman whiskey investment groups and things, that is usually a sign of trouble and weakness and rot in any market, I think. But
you're segueing in my topic.
I know. But before we segue, I would just add that I think that the problem is that as something gets bigger, it becomes more complex. And people said this about auction prices. There's, everything's going to crash, but it doesn't, because it's not just one thing anymore. The bubble's going to burst. That's the thing that people keep saying, but it's not one bubble. It's a froth. There's people going after. In the 90s, people bought whiskey at auction. It was generally driven by, is it good whiskey or not? Is it interesting whiskey or not? It was quite simple. But as it's grown, it's become more complicated. There's a lot of people involved in and spending money in and selling and buying in the secondary market for different reasons. And that sustains a more complex whole in quite a complicated way that's very difficult to discern and draw meaningful, accurate, predictive analysis from. And I would say the same about whiskey pricing. I do think that people are buying less, and I think that is going to potentially have a flatlining effect on prices next year. But I don't think the prices of casks in bond of good name single malt whiskey are getting cheaper. I just don't. They won't, because although there's an ocean of mediocre whiskey out there, the demand for the good stuff is still outstrips the supply, and the supply taps are certainly very tightly controlled. So I think that if you're talking about, you as a whiskey fan wants to go and buy a named Bowmore, for example, from an indie bottler, still going to be a pretty penny to do it next year.
Yeah, but there is a wee bit of cynicism out there right now. I think that we saw it recently with Talisker 18.
Oh,
I've seen it with a number of yeah. It's interesting to see your reaction there. I've seen it with a number of new products launched and things, and it seems to be, honestly speaking, it seems to be 14, 15, 16, 17 years and above. But it doesn't need to be. There's a sense of releasing something with a suggestion that it's super precious and things, and charging a price, and they seem to be doing quite well out of it. They seem to be selling, and that's worrying to me, because a lot of what you're talking about
appears to be happening and what actually is happening, it may be two different things. And I think that there's always delays and knock-on effects and the sort of accordion effect. Like they've put Talisker 18 out at 160 whatever. Did it deserve
175 pounds?
175 quid, yeah.
And the one I bought last year for the Online Scotch Whisky Awards, which was 1 year ago and a month, 13 months ago, I bought at 75 pounds. So it's £100 being added on to the price of a Talisker. That's a positioning exercise.
Well, absolutely. They look at Macallan 18 and think, and do you know what? I think Talisker 18 is a much better whiskey than Macallan 18. And just on quality alone, I would say it deserves to be more expensive. But but this is an example where they're both up at a level where I just think, in my view, it is too expensive. Now, my own products are often expensive, but because I choose, it's the compromise I make, because I want to work with whiskies that I consider beautiful and that are interesting to me. And it's actually much easier to work in that kind of space than it is to find bottles that you can sell below £100 and you're satisfied with the quality. I could do a lot more cheaper whiskies, but I don't consider there to be any point in bottling, 8-year-old Glen whatever, just because of the purely price consideration. I really care a lot about the quality first and foremost. Makes it tricky for us sometimes.
Yeah,
but
sure. Are you direct? You must be seeing that then, because the strap that I brought up there is and I know this to be close to your heart, because I've read it in your writing, and it's here very deliberately, but it's something that's constantly driving my thought process when I'm looking at the whiskey landscape generally right now, is that we're not just going into a specialist retailer or browsing on our favorite online retailer and looking at the prices and comparing one to the other. What we need to do is kind of step back a wee bit and realize that a lot of the prices on the shelf, especially in the realms of independence and things, are being forced. And there are other dynamics at play here. And you talk about whiskey and bond. So I'll put that strap up there, Cask investment. What a great idea. I'm being very provocative and tongue in cheek there. But, people come to me regularly and say, oh, I've been offered this. This company's offering me this opportunity to invest in casks. And my only answer to say to them is, I don't touch that. And then I just need to leave it. I can't give any advice at all. It's just...
Yeah, I really resist. I get asked as well occasionally, and I really resist trying to give advice or get embroiled in these subjects. And the annoying thing about doing old bottles or being known as somebody that did, something to do with old and rare whiskey, is that I would often get asked to talk about the investment aspect of these things. And I know it's a subject which is, much more commonplace and even popular now, but it's one I find quite boring and vulgar and not very interesting to me personally, even though, of course I invest in whiskey. I invest in my own future pleasure. I invest in the joy of possessing bottles that excite me and that I love. And I think that's what it comes down to in the end, is that cask investment, what a great idea. Yeah, sure it is. If you really, I think, first and foremost, love whiskey, and then you dedicate yourself to understanding the market, learning about it, and doing it on a time scale and in a way which is going to actually, make you some kind of, although, all this stuff about guaranteed returns over percentage of whatever they say. You know, they say, oh, you're going to get
Yep,
50% a year or some just contemptible lying horseshit like this.
yes, yep.
Like I just, oh, I hate it, and it's doing damage. You know, I really wish, if there's one thing I wish the mainstream industry would do, is get together and force a stop to this absolute nonsense. And some bottling houses are, well, third party bottlers are doing good stuff on this. Like Whiskey Broker's done some good things in kind of changing their rules and things. And now, like
Sorry,
we
Angus.
can,
Bellman Teeth is just dropping out. He's just
yeah,
bought us a wee dram to tell us that he's going to be picking us up on the replay. But he just wanted to say thank you in advance for keeping him company tomorrow morning. Bill, thanks for
well,
dropping by to leave us a wee dram, and I hope you do enjoy it tomorrow. I'm
cheers,
enjoying it
Bill.
right now, Bill. Cheers.
Yeah, I think that you know, we as a bottling company invest in whiskey in the sense that we buy casks because we have an exit, because we have a whole company and strategy around exiting from that investment by bottling it as a product, which, you know, we put you know, there's multiple tiers of like thought and creativity go into taking that. What frustrates me is that type of business, that business model is being disrupted and frustrated because people that own casks are increasingly trying to get essentially the price per bottle for the whiskey while it's still in cask.
The cask, yeah.
And they're doing this by seeking out high net worth individuals, or they're really, you know, rinsing this this investment line till it's raw. You know, this idea that, you know, you own these casks, liquid gold, blah 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 blah. It's just, it's not accurate. It's damaging, and you do wonder what happens at some point when, you know, how long is that sustainable for, and what's the point at which it breaks? And these things have happened before. There have been, Nick Morgan's written well about previous sort of boom and bust concepts of cask investment and these mini pockets where these notions were sort of more publicly promoted, and the sort of flash in the pan things that have long been largely forgotten about now. People think it's this new thing, but it's not really. It's just more cycles. The industry, the whiskey industry, goes in cycles, and it's just because it takes so long. It has such a long, sort of slow life as a product. You know, Scotch whiskey, 10, 12, 20, 30 years old, that, you know, these companies have been around for a long time, and people's lives, human lives, are short by comparison. People's working lives are short by comparison, and people's memories are short by comparison. So
I think we all need to do as much as we can to help people be aware of cynicism and things out there. I think if we're into whiskey as enthusiasts, none of us fall for these things that come up in our social feeds and these ads that we're presented with, talking about the wonderful returns that you can have on casks. I think that the next couple of things that we are going to roll into here are all connected. And the next one is, if we talk about casks and we talk about, let's take this away. If we talk about the stock that's out there, I mean, conversation so far has already kind of, you know, hinted towards it. There must be, with the capacity increases that we've seen from the incumbent producers, with the new distilleries that are on board, with everything that's happening, the boom in Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, English, it doesn't matter what corner of the globe that you look, where there's whiskey production, it's expanding, right? There has never been so much whiskey out there, right, than there is in, as I sit and speak to you, in 2022. And that's when we talk about this. You didn't talk about it in the context of a bell curve, but the way you spoke about it with these kind of bookend concepts of you know, very little of the really, really beautiful whiskies, but this vast, I think you've referred to it as an ocean of
mundanity.
Mediocre. Yes. Yeah.
Ocean of mundanity. Yeah. And the mundane can become the beautiful, but it just often needs time. This is the thing about the dangers of using all these STR, active oak casks, virgin oak, whatever, is that they're not really quick fixes for beauty. They're not a facelift on a whiskey. Well, if they are, they're a dodgy one where you can see the joins. You know, I don't believe that. Like, I try and give you an example. Like, I'm just looking on my shelves here. What would I consider a good example? Like, a bottle of 1983 Kleinleach that's 25 years old, that's been matured in a very knackered plain oak butt.
Yep.
It's an expensive bottle and it's desirable because it's very charismatic distillate that is a base amazing ingredient been put into a very gentle light touch oak cask and just left for 25 years. There is no technology that currently exists that can replicate that kind of flavor profile and that kind of quality. Now, there might be some 8-year-old Macduff sloshing about in the warehouses at the moment that, left to its own devices, could become really something very beautiful and special. And it's not that every whiskey needs 25 years, but by and large, most distillates made in Scotland, most commercially, large scale distillery distillates, they do need time. I think they need generally more than 12 years, often not as many as 30. Somewhere between that is when they hit their sweet spot. But this, there is a big pile of whiskey in Scotland, fucking loads of it, so much of it. This idea that there isn't enough whiskey to go around is not necessarily true, but there isn't enough of the stuff people want. This is like, everyone can go out and buy a bottle of whiskey. Look on the Whiskey Exchange, go to the Good Spirits Company. If you've got some money in your pocket, 100 quid in your pocket, and you want to buy a nice bottle of whiskey, you are spoiled for choice. Supply is not necessarily the issue, but it's control of supply. If you're an indie bottler, it's very different from if you're a distiller. And the reason is that, distilleries make the liquid, but the liquid has to sit behind a brand. And if you've got a good, strong brand with very good liquid, you really have a monopoly over something very powerful. So you want to be careful about how you control it. I understand that. As an indie bottler, our brands are everything to us. Whisky Sponge is our brand. Equinox and Solstice, notable age statements. These are our brands. And it's quite a fragile, difficult, complex situation because we've got a monopoly over our brands, but we don't have a monopoly over liquid until we buy a cask. And that's why people start distilleries, is why indie bottlers start distilleries, because it's the way to create a mini monopoly over something that is yours and as a tangible asset. And then you can work on branding and try and tick the other box. So yeah, I think there's absolutely an ocean of pretty boring whiskey out there that's perfectly decent, but boring. When I say boring, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means it's not exciting. I mean,
well, I think there's personally, I don't have the same experience under my belt as you, but I think that there are lots of really exciting. It's interesting that you mentioned STR casks. I think there is a place for them, but they do a very specific thing at a very specific point. But I do think that you offered to send me some samples for this tonight, and I said, well, thank you very, very much, but it's not necessary. In the end, I picked them up from you at the weekend. We're not going to touch those tonight. Thanks for the samples. I had one the other night, and it was a belter. Thank you. But I went behind your back and I went to the Whisky Sponge website and I bought a bottle because I was curious.
How dare you?
It's the first ever bottle I've bought of Whisky Sponge. Whisky Sponge, to me, I am a geek and I am a whiskey botherer and all of these great things, but the money that I spend tends to be things that people can connect with, that are my audience. I'm interested in experiencing bottles that they can pick up wherever they are in the world. Most of the time, I don't always manage that. I talk about the things that I love, but I try to focus on things that are available. And the Whisky Sponge for me has always been, and no pun intended, a decadent treat. It's to me, it's an expensive bottler, and I think I know. We might have to talk about it. I think I know why it's expensive. I should ask you, but I was pleasantly surprised to talk to you, and you said that you are making efforts to try and get something that still fits with what you're after in whiskey, but also can be more affordable. And that's what I plumped for. I found, you've already mentioned it, I found this, Angus.
The Nevis. Yeah.
It is. It's Equinox and Solstice. This is your autumn 2022 release, which is a Ben Nevis. It's 7 years old now. If we were to consider £75 I paid for this for a 7-year-old whiskey, some people might turn their nose up. But I know that Ralphie released a 4-year-old Ben Nevis, and if I could get another bottle of that for £75, I would queue up for it. It's not always about age, right? It's about the impact that you get. I decided not to make a fanfare about opening that while we were talking tonight, but it's distracting me. It's fantastically good whiskey for 7 years old. It's Ben Nevis.
Have some as well.
Yeah, if you've got some handy, perfect. I've literally opened that. Here's the foil. I've torn it off as we sat here tonight. I just haven't had time to do it in advance, but I thought I'll do it in the quiet, because if it doesn't sit with me, I might not even mention it until Angus isn't here anymore, and then I'll talk about it. Save your blushes. But it's fantastic whiskey. How has this come about? This is obviously a small batch. It's not a single cask, right?
It is a single cask.
Wow, okay.
It was quite a big. I mean, it's a second fill sherry butt. It was a big cask, and only 7 years in a sherry butt. There was something like 800 bottles worth of whiskey in the cask. So we split it in, and because it was. So the story behind this is, it was a cask we bought from Signatory, and when I was going around the warehouse, I was able to, so I get to sample some of the casks and decide what we want to bottle. And I took the sample home with me of this one and was really like, this is really good. This is really good young sherried Ben Nevis. But the natural cask strength was knocking on the door of 62%, and I thought it's a bit sharp at cask strength. So I tried it at a bunch of different strengths. I thought it really works, and it keeps changing at different strengths. So we chopped the cask in half and did half of it at 48.5%, which is my kind of favorite. It's my version of 46, essentially. I love 48.5 because it's got some historical precedent as a bottling strength for indie bottlers, and it just seems to work for many spirits. There's two strengths I think work really well for most spirits: 48.5 and 57.1, which is the old 100 proof. And so we did half of it at 48.5 as Equinox and Solstice, and the other half we did at 100 proof, 57.1 as notable age statements, as a 7-year-old Ben Nevis as well, obviously. And we did them both first when we did a stand at Whisky Live Paris this year, and we had them both on the table, and it was really great seeing people's feedback, because it sort of, in my mind, justified the approach, because they do become almost like two different whiskies in some ways, because the 57.1 version retains so much of that sharpness and power, but 48.5 it's still rich, it's still oily and fat, and that's the thing I love about it. It's very Ben Nevis. It's very kind of fat, greasy, industrial, mechanical West Coast Highland malt whiskey Ben Nevis, and it's just with a really elegant cloak of second fill sherry, but it's quite punchy sherry. Like, it's got a good, like, robust, velvety cloak of sherry about it, and the two marry very well, and it works really nicely. And the 48.5% version, which is the Equinox and Solstice one that you've got, in my mind, that's the one which is just simpler, more rounded, more balanced, and it's really a whiskey that the whole point of the Equinox and Solstice series is simple, very directly pleasurable whiskies that have a sort of a single, simple, direct character, and that they work well in tumblers. You just pour a dram and you have a sip, and it's to be enjoyed outdoors or going walking in nature, or it can be just, around the kitchen table, pouring big drams with your pals, or it can be something that still works in a nosing glass, but it's not necessarily just for that.
It's really terrific. I'm shocked at how quickly I've got through the glass. It's thick, heavy. You used a good word. You said fat. It's marmalade and spice there as well, inside all the industrial kind of West Coast.
Marmalade, absolutely. That very like Seville orange peel, bitter orange peel sort of vibe about it.
But there's a ruggedness about this, and it makes you realise that, okay, if I just had £75, what you said, there's going to be lots of things, but there's not an obvious thing that's going to guarantee to bring something like this. This is quite an impactful whiskey. It's big, it's shouty. It's I was distracted sipping this as you were speaking because every sip is kind of going, and it's only
Yeah,
48.5, but it's still very
that's the
communicative.
thing about 48.5. I think it treads that really fine tightrope between easiness and approachability, but also power. It retains something of cask strength about it. So it's that lovely balancing act between just directness, easiness, simplicity, but also robustness and muscle and power. And you feel like, I think the thing for me about that strength is that it carries texture very well. And that I really like texture in whiskey. Mouthfeel is very important to me.
Well, I hope
Um,
everybody watching tonight knows that I don't need to say this, and they know that I don't need to pour another dram, but I'm going to pour another dram, and I'm going to say it. Angus, that's a belter. That's a very good dram.
well, I'm very pleased you enjoy it because I was really happy with this bottling and I love the whiskey. And it's one I go back to when I'm in company where I'm just dramming and not. I don't drink whiskey very often. I like to taste whiskey a lot, but I don't sit and have a normal sized dram except in certain company and when I've got like my partner Lucy, I sit with her dad and have a dram when we're down in Harrogate in Yorkshire, and that's really nice. And that's when it's like tumblers out, and this is a sort of whiskey that's perfect for those sorts of occasions. But to go a
I
little bit
I
more
hope I
deep,
hope that anybody that's coming around this wee house over the course of Christmas, remind me that I've got that there, and I'll let you try it. It's a cracking wee pour. Jimmy's asked an interesting one, Angus. He's saying that, and of course, as soon as I touch the chat, it disappears. Mikey Larson has bought us a wee dram to say great insights. Mikey, I'm glad I never missed that. Thank you very much for your dram, my friend. I'm going to try and catch Jimmy's comment, but I'd read it, and he wanted to know. I found it. He said, "I have so many questions for Angus. Can you ask about reviewing samples? Does he feel that they are a valid basis for reviewing whiskey?"
I suppose, does he mean samples that are sent by other bottlers or
Well, he doesn't
companies, or does
specify,
he
but
mean?
I would be interested in your take on that as well. I mean, I have my own take on it, but I'd be very curious to yours. How
Yeah,
is
I think it's perfectly fine because if you were to go and so I know that like to take Ralphie for instance, I know he has a quite ideological no samples view, and there's some other people have the same thing, but to me, I think it comes down to taking a step back and looking at what someone does rationally and thinking, well, what has this person done? What is their work? Do I trust what they're doing? And if you trust what someone's saying, and I think there's quite clearly, I would hope if someone goes and looks at what I've written, not just on Whiskey Fun, but on like when I very first started, I used to write reviews on the Whiskey Online blog or with the Scotch Whiskey auctions. There's still some, not Scotch Whiskey, scotchwhiskey.com. Sorry, there's still
sure?
some tasting notes of mine up there. And, taken as a whole, I would hope that no one would ever come away and think, oh, there's definitely an ulterior motive going on there. Because why the hell would I mean, what on earth have I got to gain from elevating one or pushing another one down? The one thing I'll admit to is that sometimes I just find a whiskey I really love and it's like, I don't want to review this. I want to keep it for myself. It's mine. Like, uh, and and that is the only thing that I've done is just decide not to write about something. Um, and as Serge often says on Whiskey Fun, is if you disagree, I, it's important that I sometimes put out scores that you disagree with, or if I say that I don't like something, because how the hell are you ever going to believe me when I say that I do like something? Everyone's got. I think I would hope that someone would look at what I've written and say, this person has consistent taste, and they're consistent with their own tastes. And within that world, and within that, I think that it's absolutely fine to accept samples, and I think it's absolutely fine
Well, I
to
think
use
that
some.
there are different applications. If you use the Ralphie example that you mentioned there, Ralphie's speaking to an international audience who are hanging out with him and would very much like to pour the similar thing that he's got in the bottle sometimes and drink along with him. And they can do that. I can go back to a Ralphie video from 6 years ago and pick up the bottle that he reviewed back then and literally sip it along with him. So there's an accessibility thing there. But I think if you look at conversely, you're looking at WhiskyFun with Serge and yourself. You're actually the prolificacy, the amount of whiskies that you're getting through is incredible to witness. So the concept of anybody demanding or expecting you to have purchased all of those bottles is quite ridiculous, really, isn't it? The only way that you can do it is through trying as many whiskies as you can and writing about them, and then sharing what you write about as you do it. So I think that we all do slightly different things. I have chosen myself to review a whiskey once I've finished the bottle in a recycled review. But I will also uncork a whiskey and give people neck pour reactions and things live here on the vPub under the. It's people. You mentioned using rational approach or rational intelligence to ask what the motives are. If somebody is funded by the producer and then reviewing the whiskey, that cannot work, Angus. It can't work. And the trust is taken out. You don't even discuss the trust because they cannot objectively review the thing. So I think we should focus less on whether it's a sample or a full bottle, but ask where and how, maybe.
Well, I agree with that. I wrote about this before, about the difficulty inherent in the kind of the quid pro quo nature of whiskey in terms of the culture of writing and communication around it, which is something else which is improving, by the way, with obviously with guys like yourself and Ralphie and others who are able to do something that is funded by your audience, and is supported by your audience, which is commendable, and you do an amazing job. And for a long time, it's a very difficult world, whiskey writing, because it was only really sustained commercially by the industry. So there's a very difficult quid pro quo sensitivity aspect there, and it still goes on, and it's really challenging for sure. The thing about WhiskyFun, which I think gets lost nowadays, it's in the name, WhiskyFun. It was always and it started as a tasting diary, which is just stuff I'm tasting. And it was a lot of the time it was based, even in the early days, on samples, because Serge was very much within that network of people that shared samples. And it was samples coming from bottlers and from clubs and individuals and people tasting stuff and opening bottles privately. All this, it was a big milli, and it still is that to an extent, but the number of people sending samples from companies like bottlers, or the Diageo send samples to Serge. They don't send them to me, but they send them to Serge. And it's undeniable that WhiskyFun has become, it still is that, but it's also gathered this thing where, just through sheer consistency, it's been a very constant thing in whiskey. So it has, and I think the consistency of Serge's taste, that's the other thing, is people trust in what he writes because he does have a very consistent, demonstrable taste in whiskey. So people feel they can calibrate against that. It's like, I know Serge loves Clynelish, and he loves distillate-driven whiskies, and he loves all these sorts of things, yada, yada, yada. And he's consistent in that. Therefore, he said this about whiskey, so I think I'll feel this about that whiskey. And that's really useful to people. That's consistent, and it's information, and it's helpful, and it is fun. It's part of a culture and a community and a exchange of expression and opinions and ideas. And I think that's where WhiskyFun's success has gathered, to the point that, yes, it has influence, which then has commercial implication for people that want to sell bottles. So there's but then people send samples to Serge, and there's many times where companies have sent him samples and then just stopped because there's like, guys, these reviews are not good. Stop sending them. So, and the people that send me samples tend to be sort of UK bottlers and a few people overseas, and then also pals that send samples of stuff they've opened. So it's a big mix, but I don't get nearly as many as Serge. But then my own personal feeling about WhiskyFun and the way I view my contributions to it, I'm very resistant to this idea of influence. I fucking hate the word influencer. And to me, it's a hobby. I know people might balk at that or think, oh yeah, no, but it really profoundly is a hobby, and I use it as something to exercise my writing and tasting sort of skill set, if you want to say that word. But and I enjoy being part of it. I enjoy the community that surrounds it, and absolutely, of course, it's good for me and good for my profile. But um, I don't like this idea that, you know, I deliberately try to just pick things which I think are interesting to me, but I'm not chasing. I try to taste a variety of stuff, lots of old bottles, some new stuff, but you know, I really try not to just hammer the sort of commercial brand new this bottling. This is what Angus MacRaild thinks of this bottling, because that's not interesting to me, and I also don't think it's that interesting to other people. So
I think that's right, and I think that it has. I think it has a long lifespan, but it has a very high churn rate and a transient audience, if that makes sense. So people come in and they follow something, and then they work it out, and they move on, they progress onto something else. And it needs more people to come in with maybe a naivety or not understanding the dynamics behind the writing, the reviewing, whatever the platform is, and it can't hold them. What Serge has been able to do at WhiskyFun, and you've talked about it 20 years now, is to be consistent. I think the people that read WhiskyFun today potentially could have been reading WhiskyFun 20 years ago. He's not had that same churn of audience.
Yeah, I think he's gathered and kept an audience, which I think he's done by remaining very much.
And I think that could be somewhat true of Ralphie as well, but in a very different way, doing a very different model. You know, there's
I think the thing the one thing that's said, you can say the same for both of them, is they're just authentic. They have their own voice. There's an authenticity to it that people find charming, and they latch onto it. And the other thing about Ralphie, which is very similar to WhiskyFun, is the fun aspect. Yeah, I think that's the thing as well, that you know,
well, it's something that Serge has been able to do.
Too serious is what I would say.
Serge has been able to do it. You've been able to do it, despite literally, by definition, being in the industry now. You own a company now, Angus. But your voice, your opinion, your perspectives, and I would suggest that Serge is the same. Definitely Ralphie's the same. We've managed to stay in this position where we are part of the enthusiast community. We are here because we love whiskey, and that's the thing that's you know, opportunity, desire, whatever has pushed us in this place that we talked about, this incidental career. It's put us there, and we have somehow been able to remain very much with our feet in the enthusiast side of the aisle, if that makes any sense.
Well, it circles back round to what I said at the start, which is that I think this is the first, I'm of perhaps the first generation of people that was able to do a career like this, which means there's still quite an experimental aspect to everything I'm doing. I don't necessarily know what I'm going to be doing or where I'm going to be in 10 years from now. But I am keen, and it's why. So I do self-analyze quite a lot in terms of what I'm doing, and I think, is this the right thing to do, or should I be doing this? You know, even though I suppose, like Decadent Drinks, publicly facing is quite frivolous and silly.
Yeah.
But behind it, there's quite a lot of serious stuff going on, and it's you know, quite a lot of it.
You can be serious. You can be serious about having fun, right?
Yeah, but I think that I'm trying to go forward in my career while still preserving and keeping hold of the bits that I like doing and that I think are worthwhile and that I'm interested in doing, even though sometimes there's a tension between them, and sometimes you could make arguments that it doesn't necessarily make sense. But as long as I can still feel like I'm being true to myself, and I can make an argument back and say, no, actually, to me, it does make sense. And I think that's the key thing, is being true to yourself and being honest with your audience, or if you're writing things publicly, if you can stand by what you're saying, and if people can see that you're being consistent, and you try to offer something of value, and you don't say, this is why I don't write a lot too often. I don't count tasting notes as proper writing, but writing essays or articles or whatever. I try to be a little bit sparing and all that because I don't want to bombard people with my opinions or clutter the internet. There's enough opinions on the internet as it is. And if I write something, I want it to be something that is, I've taken time to think through. But yeah, it comes back to this idea of I'm just still experimenting a bit and figuring it out and cobbling this career together as I go along. And I didn't necessarily plan all this stuff. So I might not always get it right, but I'm always trying as best I can, is what I would say.
Well, we're all very grateful for it because we all get to, vicariously do it through you. We get to taste the bottles if we want to, if we want to engage. We get to understand what you're picking out and what you're doing, and we get to follow you from a distance as fans and lovers of whiskey, but also as fans of Angus and your opinions and what you write about. We don't need to agree all the time, but we do get a lot out of you sharing your kind of haphazard path through whiskey. I enjoy it a hell of a lot. Nick Gascoigne in the chat has said, I have to say, Aquaviti, this is a great vPub. Engaging, thought-provoking, and authentic, thanks to you and Angus. And I think that I hope that that's more than anything what I wanted to try and achieve tonight is to write. I'm definitely out now. Have a good evening. You all, says Gordon Fraser. All the best. Sorry, I'll keep it as all the best. That's not what you said, Gordon, but thank you, buddy. Thanks for the kind words. And thanks for dropping in tonight. And I was just trying to pick up the Jimmy Legg comment as I freeze the chat. Top shelf, Dustin is saying, Aquaviti, can you ask more about the idea of knowing how that whiskey will change versus a sample is just a neck pour and an in-time tasting? Well, I think, I don't know if we want to dwell on it too much, Dustin, but I think you're right. We talk about the transition and how a whiskey can change from top to bottom. Doesn't matter if that can be scientifically measured or not. If it's a factor in your enjoyment of the bottle, it's a factor. And it's not going to be unique to you. Other people are going to feel the same thing as the bottle changes over time. So we do have to, I think, talk about the context. This is a sample. So you know that it's a sample. And if it doesn't talk about from the heel or from the neck pour or from the shoulder, you know it's just a sample and you need to weave your own rational intelligence into that. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, bottles absolutely change, and that's something that we factor into our notes on WhiskyFun quite often. There's been plenty of times where we've said this is from a sample and actually we think it's flawed and we don't score it. We just say this is, or that we think this bottle has been open too long, for example, which with old bottles at festivals and things is frequently a problem. But I don't know. I think certainly for the majority of new releases and modern stuff or cask strength things, yeah, when whiskies change in bottle, you're adding another layer of perceptive detail and complexity in terms of already, just as if we all have the same cask sample, we've all got slightly different takes on it, slightly different opinions. And then if we start to try the same whiskey from the same bottle at different points, you're adding so many different factors of differentiation and subjective, experiential sort of differences. That for me makes it something which, unless we all agreed as a community to impose an absolute uniformity on how we assessed whiskies and at what point from the bottle that samples were drawn.
That sounds like something that would require a committee.
So unless we were able to do that, I think it's a minefield which is impossible to make perfect. So I agree that samples have their issues, but so do full bottles, so do the heels, so do the tops, so do the middles. And also not every bottle is stored in the same way. So not every middle of every bottle is exactly the same. And certainly not every old bottle is. It's why we sometimes why I often like to revisit certain bottles from different bottles. And that's one of the beauties of old bottles, because after 50 years, what started life as the same liquid has gone on, you know, if it's a single cask, it's gone on sort of 300 different journeys. And some
Yeah,
of them that are only still in existence are all different, with different stories to tell.
yeah,
And it goes, and I circle back to the point of it being about fun, which is that it's not meant to be scientifically accurate or perfect. It's meant to be about fun and sharing and sort of
we're not saving
communication.
lives here. We're just finding ways to enjoy being alive, right? That's the thing.
Yeah, it's culture and communication. And so I completely agree that there's problems with any kind of uh, mode of assessment, just because there is no consistency in how we all do it. In the same way that we could argue, if you got all your Dramfrace crew in here and all the people from Malt Review and all the different reviewers out there, I'm sure we could have a Thunderdrome on or a battle royale on whiskey scoring systems that would bore the arse off everybody.
And yeah, I like the way you think, because we would stop talking about scoring systems and end up just enjoying the whiskey, I predict.
I
Great
would hope
idea.
so. I would hope that's what would happen. Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the chat talking about recent articles on Dramface, weaving into exactly what you're talking about. Falsgraf mentioned even the one today where it was Ogilvy, I think, in the US, went into something with expectations, and the expectations ruined the experience for him, but his patience has taught him to go through the bottle a wee bit more. And while it never ever turned into anything spectacular, it gave him another wee lesson experience. And Jimmy's come in. Oh my goodness, Jimmy, that's far too generous. What you doing, son? What you doing, my friend? Last question, I promise, he says. I'd love to know if writing his Remembering Dad, I read that, my goodness. And the picture of you being carried by your dad, that was so,
Yeah.
so poignant. Yeah, if writing his Remembering Dad article helped him at all, it's very clear to see how it helped many others. It was incredibly beautiful and heartfelt, so much so I have a hard time rereading it. I get that exactly, Jimmy. I've been at pains not to mention it at the weekend with Angus or tonight. But there you go. Jimmy's laid down the gauntlet.
Well, I don't
Super
mind. I don't
poignant
mind
piece.
talking about it a bit. I mean, first of all, I'm happy and humbled to hear that feedback. I've had a lot of nice feedback like that about it, and um, I wrote it very much for myself and not for any other reason than I just sort of if you like writing, I think you sometimes get bugs inside you where it's just this idea or a thing that you feel you really want to write, and you get it down.
Yep.
And I eventually wrote it and thought for a while about whether I should publish it at all, or it's quite a private thing. But
Mm-hmm.
but when I started writing, I was obviously pretty sure I wrote it in the sort of way that it was for publication, was to be read. And I just hope that it did my dad justice, which I feel it did. My dad was a really important person to me, and losing a parent, I think, at any stage in your life is obviously hard, especially if you're close to them. And I think grief is a very personal thing, so it's very boring in some ways, because so many of us go through it in one way or the other. And because it's so personal, it's very hard to make other people, or to get other people to perhaps really understand it. So we sort of don't talk about it. We shut it up. And I think we have in this country a bit of an unhealthy relationship to grief. So yeah, it's and it still it affected me profoundly, losing my father, and I
Yeah.
still
Well, I remember
say,
what my takeaway from reading it was, very much about the relationship of you and your dad. But I remember what it made me. I read it when my son was at school, and it kind of made me want him to be here. I wanted to immediately affect some of the output of that article, because I realized that in the day to day and the stress and the rush and the grind, I'm impacting his life in often very small ways, but things that he might carry out forever. And it made me reflect on that. So it's not just about the loss; it's about the here and the now.
yeah,
And I'm with Jimmy. Thank you for writing it, Angus. It was super, super powerful and poignant. Stephen O'Connor is saying, Can Angus talk about how his palate differs from Serge and maybe an example of a whiskey where there was drastic difference in the score? It's a fantastic question. I'm going to take it, Stephen. I've got 2 more wee straps to use, and then I'm going to ask you if you're on a curfew tonight. Can you stay? You've got to stay for the quiz at the end.
Keep going if you want. It's all right. No problem.
Perfect. Okay, that's a fantastic question from Stephen. I think we want some dirt there. Is you and Serge?
Well, no, I will give you the ultimate dirt, which is that Serge is a much better critic of whiskey than I am, because he's less emotional. Serge is not shy of using the phrase "stupid bloody whiskey," whereas I'm a far too emotional Scottish person, and whiskey as a cultural thing and a sort of something that I feel in my DNA and my bones, and particularly about being a sort of, like, I'm a sort of person that will buy a fusty old bottle of black bottle blend, like crappy black bottle blend from the 70s, because I've got very romantic memories of that was a thing that men in my family drank, and that was like working men on the west coast of Scotland. That was their blend in the 70s, and I feel a hard to articulate connection to that and that phenomena. So I like, and you know, I know we were planning to talk a bit about blends, for example. Like I prefer malts, of course, I've said it, but some of the best drinking experiences I've had have been just very basic blends, but with the right people and in a very different circumstance to how I often consume and talk about whiskey publicly. And the thing about Serge is he's less emotional. I'm more emotional. And how we differ, it's hard to think of things where we really were poles apart in scores. There have been a few. There've been a few bottles, but it'd be just like random old bottles, which are probably boring to list. But there was a cask strength Glenalbin by Eduardo Gicconi in the 60s, where he gave it like 88 and I was like 95. This is amazing. And there's been plenty of occasions where we out a wee bit. What I tend to find is that, so he loves Clynelish, but Clynelish, and I love Clynelish as well, a beautiful, impeccable distillate, gorgeous, still brilliant whiskey. But it's on the east coast of Scotland. And I mean, like, no offense to anyone from the east coast of Scotland, but west coast is better. So I'm a Laphroaig guy, and Serge is a bit, yeah. I get why I don't like 4 Oak and Select and all this pish, but I still think Laphroaig 10 has something about it. Even though I'm on an eternal campaign to get it bottled at a higher strength, and until they do that, I will not stop bleating about it. But
I agree. I agree with you fully. I agree, and all we can do is just kind of work together to keep building a community, because it's consensus we're talking about. It's not individual opinion. If you enjoy whiskey for long enough, you start to taste exactly what you're talking about. And often there's this idea that, and I did understand it for a long time, and I still see it. It still exists. The barrier to entry is ABV. It's too strong an ABV can be difficult for somebody coming in. But the difference between 43 and 46 or 43 and 48% is negligible. And what it can do is potentially unlock a hell of a lot more flavor, texture. Just for me, it's ABV, as the years tick by, becomes more and more, powerful towards my whiskey enjoyment. And it's not consuming alcohol, because the stronger the ABV, the more you slow down, right? It's you can't drink a cask strength whiskey easily. You have to taste it. Every sip is trying to grab your attention. So literally one small pour of a cask strength whiskey you can spend a whole night with. Whereas if it's 40% whiskey, it just it tips down. I mean, I've said it so many times. Anyway, Angus, I've got a couple more before we get into the quiz at the end, but I want to go through these because as we've talked, there are questions here. That's kind of meant that I'll leave it out to the end. You've already mentioned we've got barley is still king up there. Based on what you were talking about, you will pursue old blends out of curiosity and things, but your experience is continually teaching you, I think, And I feel the same way. I want to be promiscuous. I want to be open. I want to be open-minded about other styles of whiskey, other production of malt whiskey across the world, rye and corn and lots of grains. And I want to engage with blends, but I still find myself seduced by product made from barley.
Yeah, me too.
Are you in the same boat?
Yeah,
I feel
100%. And this is the thing, like, it's quite trendy to say, like certain commentators love to say, "Oh, people overlook blends. Why does everyone overlook blends?" Blah blah blah. It's like
I see it.
people
I
have
see
been
it.
banging about blends for years, and they're not overlooked. They're the mainstay backbone of the industry, whatever. But I think it's perfectly acceptable to like. There's plenty of blends I like. I've tried some of them. I love some of them. I've rated very highly, and when I've written about them. But uh, by and large, and almost always, I prefer malt whiskey, and it's not just single malts, but malt whiskey, pot still whiskey derived from malted barley, made in pot stills. I like the texture, I like the flavors it delivers, and I like the way it feels in my mouth. And I just think it's not something that can be bettered, in my view, by grain whiskey. Grain whiskey is different for sure, but it's a hugely industrial, mechanical thing. It's an industrial spirit, which is flavored with oak and used to add bulk to these products we call blends. I might be being a bit cruel in some ways, and I'm not denying there's skill in making blends, and I'm sure that I couldn't do it, but I prefer the flavor and the texture of malt whiskey.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily even need to be Scottish single malt whiskey. I bottle stuff from other countries. We just bottled a couple of amazing German malts that are really amazing, and
Yep.
it's just a personal preference, and I've no issue if you prefer blends. You being, whoever you are out there in the world,
Yep.
none at all. And I don't even dislike blends. There are plenty of blends I enjoy. I just told you that story about Black Bottle. That's there's emotional enjoyment as well as organoleptic enjoyment. But I just, people say to you,
Your
"Oh,
preference will remain.
that's the thing I get." People accuse you and say, "Oh, you just like malt. You're a snob." I was like, "All right, fine. I'm a snob. I like to pursue the things that I enjoy. I mean, all right, I'm a snob. Whatever. Move on. I don't care. I prefer malt whiskey. There. I
Yep.
cannot say more than that.
And
Really.
I think I will continue to pursue all styles of whiskey, because even if all it seeks to achieve is to remind me that my preferred lane is malt whiskey, then it's done something positive, right? But also, in order to speak about it, I think that it's nice to know what different grains do to whiskey. For me, grain whiskey and malt whiskey are two different drinks. I often I feel more comfortable when they're separated in my own head, and that probably comes across in my narrative, my writing, or whatever it is. And I think it's also the way that we structured the Oswes, the Only Scotch Whisky Awards, this year was to make that separation, because the overlap is the blended word, blended Scotch and blended malt, and yet there is no overlap there. One is made from barley, and the other is grain whiskey, and they are, in my mind, completely different drinks. Here's another one for you then. We really need some more new distilleries.
Yes, I agree. Because
You're
because
not at all intimidated by the saturation, right? I've kept this for you here, and I'll bring this up so that you can see this, Angus. You might like to see this, but it's going to cover your face. I don't mean to do that intentionally. It's just the way
no,
the
it's all
overlay
right.
is. Yeah, you recognize this wee line rampant, right? But if we go on to the next one here we have all the new distilleries that are currently in some form of planning. Here we have all the distilleries that are funded, and some
Yeah.
of them are in progress, or work in progress construction. And here we have all the distilleries that are out there that have actively released product. And if you combine all of these together on this final map, what you're left with is 72 72 Scotch distilleries since the year 2000. So it does include Glengyle, Kilchoman, and
Yeah. Okay.
but it's just this millennium. This just 72 distilleries
It's very
potentially.
interesting how it's really follows the edge of the country round. There's not
Well,
much in the middle.
yeah, well,
I suppose
there's
you've got a few in the Highland, in Speyside there, yeah.
yeah, it does kind of swoop around. You've got Speyside, you've got the coast. There is quite a density there. It's maybe this map doesn't show it too clearly in the Central Belt, but you can see it's up even up the really remote areas of the West Coast. They're all green circles there. So that's the likes of Nickney, Rassay, Ardnamurchan,
Yeah.
that have already released product out there. So I mean, that's quite intimidating. It's quite scary. 72.
Yeah.
But when I added up the scale,
Mhm.
the capacity, I mean, it barely touched a couple of expansions and a Roselle, right? So of incumbent distilleries.
Yeah, I think that, you know, diversity is good, and I think it strengthens Scotland, not weakens it. You know, it's jobs creating really interesting spirits, and not all of them. Some of them will be mundane, and I'm sure not all of them will survive. I'm sure that, you know, you get into a slightly more edgy and competitive marketplace where your success is hopefully built on your quality more than on, you know, having a titanic marketing budget behind you.
Yes.
So I think we're just entering a new type of era in whiskey and a new type of market, and that supply and that diversity is the sort of thing which will, in time, hopefully start to add a little bit of equilibrium to pricing as well. You'd hope.
I hope so.
I
And
can't,
what
I can't say that for sure, but you'd hope that's one of the effects that would happen. And it's also a rising tide floats many boats. Like, if you've got a lot of these guys speak to each other, lend a hand to each other in terms of advice and passing on knowledge, because I think a lot of people recognize it that are in these small new startup distilleries. They recognize that you need a thriving community and industry for them to succeed. It's much harder to succeed in isolation, as I'm sure someone like Aaron would probably tell you. So I'm not at all daunted or bothered by it. I look at that map and it excites me. I feel, you know, pretty thrilled about being Scottish and about living in a country that's got such a really fascinating, interesting, dynamic and diverse industry going on.
Absolutely.
As part of a global community which is also growing and thriving. Now, are there going to be potential problems with saturation, etc.? Maybe, don't know.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as an easy market or an easy industry, I don't think. So of course there'll be challenges. Of course there will be. There's been challenges.
I think
but
it's incumbent on all of us, you, me, the industry. You talked about collaboration there. That's super close to my heart. I'm very passionate about collaboration. The rising tide analogy is perfect. But everyone in the chat tonight, everybody that watches this on the replay or whatever, it's incumbent upon all of us to make that accessible to everybody. The knowledge that you have, pass it on, share it, and try and make people understand just how amazing a thing it is, and that it is something that everybody can, with the desire or with the curiosity at the very least, connect with. Because I think that in order for the explosion of distilleries in Scotland and beyond to succeed, it doesn't need to be that they're homogenized and working together. No, they can be as diverse as they want to be, but the community of drinkers out there need to be there in order for them to succeed. And if we remain a community of drinkers, then we can look on at that landscape with genuine excitement and thrill to see it. That we are living through a wonderful boom with all the challenges that comes with a boom, as we've previously touched on.
I think it's also important to point out that, and the way I've often described this is that there's two tiers to the industry now. There's the mainstream industry, which has been here for ages and is continuing to do its thing and its backbone is blends, and that's fine. They'll continue as they sort of have done, and they may change a little bit, but not very much. All these new things and new companies and distilleries we're talking about, I really think a lot of them are part of a secondary tier um, industry, which is smaller companies making single malt for single malt drinkers. That's their business model, and so they're inherently quite different from the big guys. And I think that's something that's really important to point out, that yeah, it looks on the map like that, or when you look at the numbers, oh, it looks overwhelming, but it isn't really. It's just a phenomena that's been brought about by the way that whiskey has grown and changed and diversified, and the consumers of today, us, and also like really young kids in Asia that are really lapping up whiskey and becoming fascinated by it. They're interested in who's making the stuff, how they're making it, why they're making it, where they're making it, what are they using, where are their ingredients coming from, is it sustainable? All really interesting things that if that phenomena forces these companies to make a virtue of that, and imbue their products and their processes and their values with uh, with attitudes and decision making and qualities which speak to that audience, that's a great cyclical thing. That is
Yep.
good consumers, good taste, real genuine lifelong interest, helping sustain and create brilliant products, which sustains the loop again into the
And a
future.
culture of sipping and tasting quality rather than drinking what's
Absolutely.
available, right? Final one then, the last one before we go into the quiz at the end. Listen, if anybody's still here tonight, thank you so much. Still 240 of you, and I really appreciate it. For anybody picking it up on the replay, you will be able to drop in, and it'll all be chapter markers. So each of the topics that we speak about tonight, you'll be able to skip ahead to whatever interests you. Thank you for your staying power. Last thing to talk about is finally Scotch is under threat from global whiskey. Well, everything that we've talked about is not just happening in Scotland, right? This is now a global phenomenon.
Mhm.
There's not a developed country that you can actually in front of me tonight, because I was sipping it last night and it's still on the desk. I have an Israeli whiskey from Reb, a
Oh yeah.
Yerushalmi whiskey. This is their solemn single cask sessile oak release non-chill filtered, 46.3%. I was really, really, really excited by it. It was delicious. Thank you, Reb. Thank you so much. But so it doesn't matter where you look in the world right now. Somebody's making some kind of whiskey, and they're telling a story behind it as well. Where is the threat for this notion that Scotch is king? Scotch is it wasn't always, but it has been for a long time. Is that even a thing?
I don't really think it's even a thing. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm Scottish, and I don't feel that. I don't even care if Scotland is the king of whiskey. I don't need Scotland to be the king of anything for me to be happy to be from here and to love being from here. You know, I'm not a nationalist or a patriot. I'm very uncomfortable with these kinds of terms. I just love the fact that I'm from here. I love this wee country, and I don't feel any lack of confidence on its behalf for anything to do with the wider whims of whiskey. I think Scotch whiskey benefits from a thriving global
Yeah.
whiskey community of whether that's producers or consumers or both, however you want to quantify it. I think that if there's other producers out there making world class whiskey in Flimin Moldova, then brilliant. If it forces Scottish producers, like we touched on earlier with Japan, if it forces Scottish producers, whether they're new ones or very long established ones, to take a look at what they're doing and think, maybe we can do this a bit better, then great. That's a good thing. And we should be looking over our shoulder and having friendly competition and thinking, what can we do? And also, Moldova or the USA or Japan or Sweden or France or Germany or Australia, these countries are not Scotland. It's kind of obvious thing to say, but they are not Scotland. They don't make Scotch whiskey. They don't have, you know, Scottish history, Scottish scenery, Scottish people, and all the other cultural associations and tertiary quirks of Scottishness that go along hand in hand with Scotch whiskey. Just as Scotland is not Tasmania or Japan or Canada or the USA. These countries have their own thing going on, and more power to them, and all the success. You know, I wish them all, every one of them, all the success for doing and being their own thing. You know,
We're
and that's
so
what Scotland has done. They all do the same.
reassuringly closely aligned in so many of those things, and I think it's there's a story to be had everywhere. Try as they might, even if it's a Scotch-alike product that's made to the blueprint of Scotch whisky, it still manages to come out as something different. Whiskey's kind of almost taking care of itself, I think, sometimes. But I think that also we have this wonderful ability to taste all of these whiskies from wherever they are and know and feel that they are very, very different things. And I think that that's part of the pleasure of this whole thing. It's part of the boom. It's part of what we're enjoying. We won't get into the weeds about why every man and his dog wants to make a peated version. It's a different thing altogether. But I mean, while they're making their own products and
it's commercially viable. There's your answer in one sentence.
It's attractive. People want their peaty fix. Listen, Angus, I poured your Ben Nevis, your solstice. Your I forget, Equinox and Solstice Ben Nevis, alongside a dram that I have in the offing for my whiskey of the year this year. And because I thought they were similar as I was sipping your whiskey, but as I pour them together, they're clearly not, despite having one or two similarities. But it's held up fantastically well, and that's interesting to me because the bottle, I'm not going to reveal what it is right now because that's not next week's, but the vPub after that. But I'll show you once we finish tonight. But it's held up well, and this bottle is actually a wee bit more expensive. So it's interesting. We can't just look at the bottle specs and make.
Well, all I would say is that the Ben Nevis is a good example of why I don't do many bottlings under that. You know, the £100 threshold is a good example. Like, we don't do that many under, because it's really fucking hard to do something of that kind of quality of the Ben Nevis under £100, and I'm not prepared to just pump them out. I could go away and find plenty bottlings under those sorts of price points, but I just don't want to do it unless it's that kind of quality and character as the Ben Nevis. That's why we only do Equinox. I created this thing, Equinox and Solstice, which is actually probably one of my favorite things that we do, because anyway, I'll get into that. I really love it, and even though it's a bit quiet and doesn't get a lot of attention, I think, but I love it, and I like the concept, and just 4 bottlings to go with each season, 4 times a year, small batch, drinking strength, and often under 100, almost always under £100. And that's the stuff I really enjoy. That's the stuff I want to do more of. And when we get our own warehouse, which is happening hopefully soon, that'll start to become a bit easier. So longer term, in the next year, 2 years, you'll start to see hopefully some slightly more different products from Decadent Drinks, I would hope.
Blended malts.
Listen, I would love to do I love blended malts, but nobody fucking buys them. They do, but the problem is, and this is something that all you whiskey nerds watching this, everyone says, well, I just want affordable, delicious malt whiskies. But what they really want are named single cask malts that they can can choose to open, or they'll get their money back on them if they sell them.
Well, I know that that's a thing out there. I think my community are much, much more open-minded.
No, I'm sure.
Trust us,
no doubt.
Because where we bang on about it, we bang on it, and if I bang on it about it hard enough, I get feedback from them. Roy, okay, and this is all part of what we do. We read that sentence, I bought this bottle based on you saying, and then every muscle tenses up and you go, oh no, and then you just the release of saying, and I love it, thank you very, very much. you didn't cost me the price of the bottle. You saved me money from buying something else that I might not have enjoyed as much as this. You know, that's
We're going
lovely.
to come back to
Lovely
that idea of trust.
Yep, it absolutely is. I only speak from a point of I can only share what I am truly loving. And from there, you take from that what you will. However, recently I have been banging on about the growth in blended malts. 12 years ago, we had Compass Box. Then Dougie Lane comes along, and from there, more and more and more and more people are putting their toe in the water. I would personally love to see what the Whisky Sponge could do blending
We've done a
some malts.
couple.
And especially if it's from trying to because it sometimes does afford us an ability to connect with products at a better entry price point. For me, this is the first sponge bottling I've bought.
Well, I think I
Okay.
sent you, or I gave you in the samples that I gave you. I think you got, where is it? Here. I very deliberately sent you a sample of this bottling we did, which is Whisky Sponge Edition 44, which was the first blended malt we did, which was
I can't read your writing very easy. Saturnalia.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, I called it. It was last year's sort of Christmassy dram or winter dram.
Hold it up. It's very dark. Hold it up.
Yeah, so it's a blended malt, and this is why this was a good.
Well, this is sold out, right?
Value. Sold out. 20-year-old.
We're not selling anything here, right?
Okay. No, I'm not selling anything here at all. No, but so it goes back to this idea of, you know, price and value. I think we sold this for 85 or 89 quid, something like that.
For a
so 20-year-old blended malt, and it was a mix of one refill sherry butt of just blended malt 2001 and a 2000 refill hogshead of Glenrothes. And the idea behind it was because the blended malt stock as the main component, there was other examples of it with other bottlers on the market.
I know exactly the other examples you're talking about.
I decided to add something to it to juice up the strength a bit and to change the profile and to make it something a bit more specific to us. But that's a perfect example of something where I thought we released a really good product. It was a good 47.2 natural cask strength, lovely amount of sherry, but also quite robust and rich and fruity, and just you know, just using a bit of very basic, you know, small batch cask blending to create something that wouldn't otherwise exist. I completely agree. Blended malts are so much fun and often great quality, and I would love to be able to get Decadent Drinks into a position where we can balance what we do with sort of single cask stuff with more blended malt stuff, and along with all our other spirits that we bottle. You know, we do rums and cognacs and armagnacs as well, very much on purpose because I like the diversity and I love working with, you know, it's Decadent Drinks, not Decadent Spirits for a reason. So but yeah, that was our first blended malt that we it's the first blended malt where I created the blend that we did.
That is where I think the value lies, because what we get is not just something that's been inherited, bottled and sold and described, but we actually have somebody that's taken something and said, okay, I'm willing to gamble on this and play with it a little bit and see if we can make it better. And exactly what you've just described there, taking that thing that exists and adding another element to it in order to bring more to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's excellent. It's very, very good. I didn't even know that this had existed.
It was.
So when was this released? A wee while ago.
About a year ago, exactly. I think November 2021. We released this. I think. Yeah,
and yeah, it's for 80 quid that would have been a nice find. But I've really sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. You know, it's one of those things that we did. I think I've still got some casks of this 2001 blended malt that I'm waiting to do other recipes with. And the other thing we've done is the Equilibrium series, which is where I mix Edredire and Belechin together to make a sherry and peat profile that's a bit different. So we do things like this. It's just I want to do more of it, essentially.
Sherry and peat.
I love sherry and peat when it works.
Yeah, it's really when it's done well, it's really something to turn your nose up at. Falscraft is saying, "Good one, Roy. Thank you." And yes, the Question of the times. Thanks, Falscraft, buddy. I'm looking forward to seeing you over in Germany soon. Ryan Sutherland is saying Saturnalia, I think I'm pronouncing it properly, was class. I still have a couple of drams left. Ryan, you've already tried this. 20-year-old. Aye, good that you managed to get a hold on it. I won't hold it against you that you never told me about it at the time. It's quite interesting that some of the best whiskies I've found in the last couple of years has not been from my own exploration, but it comes from the community. It's very bi-directional. Let's hold you hostage to a quiz. Let's do it.
Aye, go for it.
We never finish a vPub without a quiz at the end. Usually the audience drops off. Not everybody's up for a quiz, but it's always out at the end. Tonight is tame. Tonight is not focused towards Angus because I wasn't sure if he was going to be here towards the end. But I get the impression that Angus is the type of character that wouldn't want it to be. He wants to just participate in a quiz the same as everybody else. And that's what we've got. Are you up for it?
Yeah, I'll expose myself to embarrassment. Why not?
I can see you getting... Okay, so what I need to do is I need to bring this back in. I lost it when we disconnected. It's come back up, which is great. Angus, there are certain terms and things that you may or may not be familiar with throughout the quiz tonight. I'll try and guide you as much as I can, but you're not playing against anybody apart from yourself. The pass mark is usually 5 out of 10. I imagine you'll kick this out, the pass mark out of the park.
I don't know. I think I have a very weird, random, and obscure whiskey knowledge. I'm just setting myself up for. I'm covering my arse here. But
you know what's really brilliant? It just shows me that what I've often said is true, that there's no such thing as a whiskey expert. There are experts in whiskey, but they know their own particular thing very, very well and very deeply. But you know, a wide-ranging whiskey expert doesn't really exist.
No, absolutely, I agree.
Now that your disclaimer's out of the way, you don't need to worry about this. If you want to declare your score, you can, of course. Everybody else, sorry, Ben, Whiskey with Molly saying had to go for a peanut butter sandwich, but back for the quiz. And Ben is going to bring us a Christmas quiz next year, so I will be in the hot seat along with everybody next week. Ben, I'm looking forward to it. Just let me know. I know that you had a wee health issue recently with a wee blood clot, so if you're healthy and you can still do it next week, you've got to let me know. Justin Wan is already saying, let's go, let's go. Fantastic, Justin. Good to have you in, buddy. Okay. Multiple choice as always. Question 1. How many of Brown-Forman's Scotch malt distilleries release a peated expression? How many of them? A, none of them. B, one of them. Or C, all of them. It's meant to be quite gentle at the beginning. Peter Lee is in. Good evening, sir. Late home. No problem, Peter.
I can't remember how many distilleries Brown-Forman own.
If it helps, Glendronach, Benriach, and Glenglassaugh. Justin Wan's bought us a wee dram as well. No comment or anything, Justin, but I'll raise a glass.
In that case, all of them.
I'll let you away with that.
Even though you essentially
hold your answer in until I ask you for it.
I get confused between Brown-Forman and some Beam Suntory half the time.
Beam Suntory, yeah. No, it's they all do, of course. All of them do. You're absolutely spot on. We've got Glendronach they've got their peated casks, their peated portwood, and all of these. We've got the Curiositas from Benriach, and more recently we've got the Smoky 12 and the Smoky 10, and Glenglassaugh we've got the Torfa. They all do it. Question 2. Which of these producers operate a fairly standard minimum bottling strength of 50% ABV? It's the easy questions at the start. One Glassman Warner is in. He's saying 1 out of 1, 100%. Time to leave. Good to have you in, Warner. It's always a pleasure to welcome you. Tom Elmer is here. Tom, I'm glad you're in tonight, buddy. We're too late to submit that bottle to the Ben auction. All the submissions are in. So I think what I'm going to do is have a private conversation with you along the idea of me getting the signatures on it, or just signing it and putting it into a regular auction and then donating the money to the Ben instead. How do you feel about that, Tom? Since we were a wee bit late, Jenny's going to join us next week to talk about our fundraiser. Is it A, Angus Dundee, B, White Peak, or C, Brookladdy? Which of those producers operate a fairly standard minimum bottling ABV of 50% ABV, which I think is commendable and often overlooked? Tom is saying sounds good. Fantastic, buddy. I'll just go over it with you, and I want to put a wee story, a wee slip of paper or something in the box with it.
I think I have an answer to this, but
go ahead, Angus. Share your answer.
I would go for C. I think it's Bruichladdich, but I could be wrong.
Absolutely. Angus Dundee have Tom and Till, and they also have Glencadams. Tom and Till, a lot of a few higher ABV ones in there, especially more recently. Fantastic to see. Ian Forteeth doing some great work out there with Glencadam and Tom and Till. White Peak putting out some decent ABV product as well, but the official kind of 50% ABV minimum seems to have been withheld at Remy, and it's long been a hallmark of Bruichladdich. Spot on. Question 3. What did Glen Grant release to celebrate Dennis Malcolm's tenure in Scotch whisky in 2021? So last year, Glen Grant came out with something very special to mark the fact that we had Dennis Malcolm, a quite incredible career in Scotch whisky. Was it A, a NAS Decades release? That's NAS in the context of no age statement as opposed to Whisky Sponge notable age statement. Was it a NAS Decades release, or was it B, a 60-year-old single malt, or C, a 48-year-old single malt? What did Glen Grant, apologies, release to celebrate Dennis's tenure in Scotch whisky in 2021? Oh my goodness, the speed of the chat. Would you be guessing here, Angus?
I want to say, I think the right answer is the A, the Decades, but I know they did a very old 60-year-old at some point. I'm not sure that was done for Dennis Malcolm or not. Could be wrong. Go on, I'll go with A.
Ooh. Angus is going with A. Welsh Toro is saying it's C, and One Glassman is saying B by popularity. It's a very knowledgeable crowd, Angus. You're up against it tonight. Absolutely B by popularity. They did release 60 years single malt for 60 years of Dennis Malcolm's service in Scotch whisky. He was born in the grounds of Glen Grant. 60 years career in Scotch whisky as well. Quite incredible. Here's a wee picture of it. If you want to pick up a bottle, you can pick up one even today. £22,000 it'll relieve you off. If I had 22 grand, I think I'd be replacing my broken old Ford, which is in the garage still to this day. But there you go. You can pick up a 22 grand bottle. Do you know what I wish, Angus? I wish that they would release a bottle to celebrate Dennis Malcolm that we could all enjoy a bottle of. What do you think? Something
I think that's why I said the Decades release, because that was sort of like maybe just wishful thinking on my part.
Yeah, that we could all raise a glass to Dennis and say, bloody hell, 60 years, no bad. But there you go. Nope. There might have been another one. I might be speaking out of turn, but this is the one that was released and publicized.
No, these sorts of releases are kind of just, I don't really think about them. They're just so
they
rarely sort of nonsense, really. So yeah,
the only time that they have coverage here, I suppose, is for a prickly quiz question. Question 5 is always an image, Angus. Sorry, we're on question 4. We're not quite there yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Thompson Whisky Distillery, Wahiki Whisky, and Cardrona Distillery are all located where? I know that you want to speak. Don't speak. A, South Africa. B, Tasmania. C, New Zealand. I'll ask you so that you don't. I mean, there is a wee bit of a delay, so they're probably banging their answers in well ahead of us anyway. But oh my goodness, quite amazing. Can you see the chat?
No, I can't.
Well, it's
actually no. If I
moving.
click the comments, okay, here we go. Yeah. My guess would be C.
Absolutely. Wahiki Cardrona hopefully gives it away, but Thompson Whisky Distillery I hadn't heard of. But absolutely, they're all located in New Zealand. New Zealand has gone from a place of having no distillation to suddenly a renaissance even down there as well. One Glassman Warner, again, is saying that he knows. Peter Box on 4 out of 4, along with Hellswood, Jerry Miller, Tommy Almargino. Too slow. Seb K is in. Fantastic, Seb. Good to see you. Andrew Pearce and Gabriel Welding. So many celebrating 100%. The picture question sent in to me by Ian Bruce. Normally these pictures are contributed by Graham Fraser. I'm very grateful. But these ones have been taken by Ian Bruce. We're looking at a still house, and quite an interesting looking still house as well. I'm just going to ask you where this could be. Are we looking at A, Port of Leith, B, Ardgowan, or C, the Lighthouse? What are we looking at there? Port of Leith, Ardgowan, or the Lighthouse? Cardrona, a fabulous dram, says Helen, but very pricey. It's certainly pricey for us here. Got a wee sample of it down there that somebody passed to me recently. I was quite tempted to get torn into it and see what it's all about. But yeah, it's expensive for us to get it here. Angus, do you have a gut feel on this one?
Yeah, it would be, my guess would be C for this one, the Lighthouse. I've visited Portleith, but not Ardgowan, but I'm guessing the Lighthouse.
Ardgowan is still to put any significant construction in place yet. I think they're very much still in the planning phase. Port of Leith is a very tall tower type, gravity fed type distillery being built out there in Leith, and this is indeed Bill Lumsden's little experimental shed, the lighthouse up at Glenmorangie. Quite a significant scale for an experimental place, I have to say.
Yeah, he's not a man of doing things by halves or small measures.
Yes. What is it? Dr. Jill Bumsden?
Professor Jill Bumsden on the sponge.
Yes.
Really need to bring her back for a big finale, I think, one day.
A renaissance at the lighthouse. Fantastic. Let's go into question 6. Okay, it's going to start to get a wee bit tougher now for all of you celebrating your 5 out of 5 pass marks already. Angus is on a 4 out of 5. He needs one of the hard questions to get his pass mark. 6. Which of these distilleries was not founded in the 70s? The 70s, just before the downturn in Scotch whisky demand. So we're looking for one that was not founded just before that downturn kicked in the second half of the 70s. A, Altavania or Altavane, however you pronounce it, Altavania. B, Fettercairn, or C, Breval, or Braes of Glenlivet, as you may choose to refer.
I think I know the answer to this one.
Hold your water. Let the folk hoping to make their 6 out of 6, and Graham Young is suggesting tall stills. Yeah, at the Lighthouse, Graham, they are. They do look very tall, slender, elegant stills. I've not seen it myself yet. Okay, you can shoot when you're ready, Angus.
I would go with Fettercairn off this list.
Yes, absolutely. Altavania, it was 1975. Breval, Braes of Glenlivet, it was 1973. Interestingly, as soon as they were open, they started to expand, adding extra stills and things. Quite amazing to see how close they ran to the wire. But Fettercairn has been around since the Licensing Act, almost 1824. Fettercairn B, if you said B, give yourself a point. So many of you on 6 out of 6, feeling confident tonight. Question 7. Which Inverhouse distillery has been referred to as the Manthania of the North? And I have to be honest with you, I heard this week for the first time ever, but I thought as soon as I heard it or read it, that it was a quiz question. Which has been referred to the Manthania of the North from the Inverhouse stable? Is it A, Old Pulteney, B, Knockdhu, or C, Balblair? I have to say I've been very deliberately awkward here. I could have thrown in a couple of distilleries that are not Inverhouse distilleries to make it a bit easier, but all 3 are Inverhouse distilleries tonight. A, Old Pulteney, B, Knockdhu, or C, Balblair?
I've never heard this before. It's got a twang of marketing bump about it. So, I mean, depending on who said it, it could literally refer to any of these. But I've got a guess. I think it's reasonably solid.
Okay. Give us your guess, buddy. Give us it.
I would go with A, Old Pulteney, because it sounds the most accurate to me in terms of the way.
Well, the marketing bump, whoever said it was I actually read it in the Malt Whisky Yearbook, 2023 Yearbook, and it wasn't the source wasn't quoted, but it was just anecdotally suggested that the Manthania of the North, because of it was a bit akin to dry sherry, was bang on Old Pulteney, I guess, spot on. So easy pass mark for you. You're now cruising on 6 out of 7. Fantastic. Easy. I agree with Angus. It's Bumf, says Welsh Toro. I have referred to Roy as the Dark Lord of the North, but isn't a quiz question, says Jimmy Legg. No, that's tonight. That cannot stick. I don't want to be anybody's Dark Lord. But of course, because I don't want it to be the case, it's going to be the case. Question 8. In October of 2017, what happened 3 times? I'm hoping that these are starting to feel a wee bit trickier. What happened 3 times in October of 2017? A. Fires at Laphroaig, and I'm not talking about in the kiln. B. Announcements of distilleries brought back from the dead. Or C. Bowmore closures due to water shortages. In October
I think I know the answer to this one as well.
Yeah, in October, fantastic. October 2017, this happened 3 times. In fact, I'll go one further than that, and I'll suggest that it was within a 48-hour window. All this happened 3 times. So in a 48-hour window, we either had 3 fires at Laphroaig, 3 announcements of distilleries brought back from the dead, or 3 Bowmore closures due to water shortages. So hopefully I've made it a 50-50 by helping you there. Angus, go ahead.
I would go with B.
Announcements of distilleries brought back from the dead, based on
Portel and Brora Rosebank.
Spot on. Spot on. I read an article just a week or two before it. It went into depth how these distilleries would not be brought back, specifically the ridiculous idea of Rosebank being brought back and things. And then literally a week or two later, we just started to read about, yes, very interesting things. I'm sure there's lots of interesting backstories behind all of it as well. But if the alternative is them never being brought back, you know, I'm looking forward to them being part of the new whiskey scene going forward. Here we have it. Question 9. Second from last is a bit of an asshat. I apologise in advance, but not nearly as much of an asshat as the 10th question is going to be. What was the split between age-stated and non-age-stated? By that, of course, I mean NAS whiskies in this year's OSWA nominations. There were 36 bottles nominated over the 6 categories. Remember, 3 categories of the 9 are about distilleries and bottlers in the Online Scotch Whisky Awards. But of the 36 bottles nominated, what was the split between age-stated and non-age-stated? A. Non-age-stated made up 2/3, 66%. B. It was exactly 50-50 split. Or C. Non-age-stated made up 1/3, 33%. So, asshat questions. There are no banana skins in the quiz tonight, but an asshat is a question that's deliberately meant to be a bit contrived, awkward, and just belligerent and just horrible. But hopefully it does make you think a wee bit. There is something interesting to take away. I hope that makes sense. I imagine you'd be guessing here, Angus.
Yeah, I am guessing, but I would guess option C.
That no age stated made up 33% in the Online Scotch Whisky Awards. One Glassman Warner is agreeing with you. With the crowd, says Greg's Whisky Guide. Good to have you in here. Greg over in Paris is also saying C. Jimmy Legg is saying obtuse. Well, Jimmy, you'd know because you coined the phrase, buddy. It is, in fact, 50-50. 18 non-age statement whiskies were nominated alongside 18 age-stated whiskies in the 2022 Online Scotch Whisky Awards. I was also fascinated to discover that. So there is an asshat question to finish on tonight. We are going to get our obtuse on before the end. Jimmy's celebrating a 7 out of 9. Well done to you, Jimmy. 8 out of 9 for Chuck. Fantastic, Chuck. Malt Minion. Andrew Pearce is on an 8 out of 9. Tom Elmer and Bruno Martin's both on 7. Nicholas is on 8. Seb K is on an 8 out of 9 as well. I'm looking for the 9 out of 9s. I must have lost a couple of people along the way. Jimmy Jazz, good for you, Jimmy. And Warner are both on 9 out of 9. That's fantastic, along with Graham Young. Fantastic. Hoyt Temple, Hoyt. So good to see you. I hope you're keeping well, my friend. Good to welcome you in here. Chris Brook is also on a 9 out of 9 as well. Are you quite impressed? We have quite a knowledgeable crowd. Sugar Kitty is also on 9 out of 9 as well. Sugar Kitty, fantastic. Along with MJ Roden and Roy O'Meara in Norway. Terrific stuff. This is quite an asshat. I apologise in advance. I hope it doesn't lose me any friends, subscribers, likes, or otherwise. Here we go. The phrase Rome was built on 7 hills and Dufton stands on 7 stills is pretty well known, I think. But if stills were centiliters, how many would be active in Dufton today? So if we count up the amount of active stills that are today active in Dufton and we equate them to centiliters, would they be around the same as A half bottle plus 2 drams at the bottom? I'm waiting for a reaction from Angus, but it's just deadpan incredulity. B, a full bottle minus 2 drams at the pot still. Or C, a full bottle, 2 standard minis, and a pour at the old and rare show. I'm going to help you tonight. A dram at the bon accord and a dram at the pot still are both 35 mils, so 3.5 centiliters. If I'm talking about a half bottle and a full bottle, I'm speaking about UK or European bottling sizes, not what has been.
When I said earlier I wasn't good at maths.
Me neither. I went through this 2, 3, 4 times just to make sure. Too slow saying I love you, Roy. Because you got it, Rob, or Sid Martin?
I'm purely going to guess C, just because it has the old and rare show mentioned in it as an answer.
You think it's a nod to Angus MacRaild, do you?
Well, no, I don't necessarily think it is. I think there's every chance I'm wrong. I'm just going with that.
Well, let's add it up. Petehead is saying, didn't you have something better to do today, Aquaviti? Exactly. This came to me very easily. A half bottle would be 35 cl, and 2 drams at the bottom would be 2 times 3.5, so 7. So that's 42 centiliters, so 42 stills. B would be a full bottle minus 2 drams at the pot, so that's 70 cls, minus 7 at the pot still, so that would be 63. I'm struggling there, 63 stills. Or C would be a full bottle, 70, plus 2 standard minis, 5 each, that's 80. And a pour at the old and rare show is 1 cl typically, Angus. So would be at 81. So we're looking at either a 42, 63, or 81 stills. Hope that makes it a wee bit easier for everybody. Angus, what do you think? Still C?
I think 81's quite a lot. But then Glenfiddich has got a gazillion stills. William Grant have got a lot of stills. So...
boom. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done. Well done navigating the ASAT. Absolutely fantastic. 81 stills active in Dufton today. And as Angus has pointed out, 43 of those are at Glenfiddich alone. Balvenie have a few, 11. Caninvie have 9. The Diageo distilleries make up the balance with 6 each, Mortlach, Dufton and Glendullan. Quite incredible. If we talk about the amount of distilleries there are only 6 active right now. But Parkmore, Convalmore, who's the other one I'm forgetting? There's a missing Dufton distillery. Pittivee, of course. How could I forget? So, but I don't know how many stills it would have had at its peak, but I can't think it's ever been as high as 81. And Falsgraf is saying, I do not understand the question. Sorry, Falsgraf. But I'm getting a lot of heat in this one. Jimmy Jazz still managed to nail his 10 out of 10. Jenny Miller is saying, curse you, Roy. Chris back. Oops, it just jumped. Chris Brook is saying, wow, 10 out of 10. And I said question 5. That'd get the rest wrong. Great quiz, Roy. Well, Chris, it's a great quiz for you because you nailed a 10 out of 10 and congratulations.
Well, Roy, I'm going to love you and leave you. And
no, give me 1 minute to finish here, buddy. If you can, I'll ditch this. I want to raise a glass and just say thank you. If you can. That's it. We're finished for tonight. The quiz is over. You've managed to cover yourself in glory. You've done very well at the quiz. Angus, I've enjoyed tonight very much.
Yeah, so have I. And I wanted just to say thank you to you and to all your loyal followers and audience. I've really enjoyed chatting, and I hope I can come back again sometime. It's been really nice. And yeah, thanks to everyone for the kind comments and the good questions. And yeah, this is exactly what whiskey should be about. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm going to raise a glass with Angus here. I'm going to look forward to meeting you all again next week. I'll say goodbye to you in a second. If you're still around when the credits roll, Angus, I'll raise a glass with you afterwards. If you need to go right now, that's fine too. But I have enjoyed it tonight because I couldn't have imagined a time when I started to do this where I would be able to have Angus MacRaild come on and speak as candidly and as openly and as insightfully as you have tonight. So it's not just about whiskey. Sometimes it's about all the other things that whiskey can bring, my friend. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for bottling this rather lovely, tasty thing. Cheers to you,
Cheers
Angus
to you,
MacRaild.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thanks.
Hang about if you can. If you have to go, understand completely. Thanks, buddy.
I will
Thank
need
you.
to shoot off, but I'll drop you a line. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you, Angus. Good night. And Jimmy Legg is saying, so very nice things. Angus is me if I had intelligence and ambition. So great to see him live. Thanks for so much for getting him on. Thanks to you, Jimmy, for being a part of it as well. Gabriel Wilding saying, what an absolute privilege tonight has been, Aquavite. So many thanks to Angus for sharing with us. Thank you, Gabriel. And Frank Peathead is saying, I'm with that, calling it a day. Going to hit the sack. Great vPub. Thanks, Aquavite and Angus. And thanks to all of you. See you next time. Slancha Helen is saying, fine vPub with another great guest. I realise how long we've been on for, 2 hours and 50 minutes, and yet you're here. I hope that some of you are able to pick this up podcast style and listen to all the chat that we've had tonight using the chapter markers below. For me, it's been an absolute privilege. I've enjoyed some lovely whiskies, some lovely chat, some fantastic support from all of you guys like I always do. I look forward to welcoming you back. I'm going to put these two things together. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I'm going to look forward to welcoming you all again next week for a community session where I'm just going to try and involve as many of you as I can, just have people dropping in and things like that to celebrate Christmas. It'll just be a couple of days before Christmas, a week from tonight. And then, of course, we'll have the end of year celebration on the 29th. Whatever you're doing over the course of the next few days, I hope it's not too hectic for you. Life's pretty hectic right now. I hope you have time to sit down and relax a wee bit. And when you do, I hope there's something lovely in the glass as well. Thank you all for joining me again tonight. Beautiful whiskey folk dedicated barflies. You're all very dearly loved, and I'll see you again next week. Slancha Ba.